everyone here a happy holiday and a good, safe New Year. This is a regular meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioners Sobroff, Decker, Bonner, and Goldsmith are present, and we have a quorum.
Okay, we'll begin with the consent agenda items. Do we have speakers on any of the items?
I'm showing 11 cards on 1A
Okay.
and 1 card on 1C.
Okay, so may we have, do we have any cards on B or D?
We have none, sir.
Okay, do we have a motion for approval of consent agenda items B, 1B and 1D?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, let's go to item number 1A, please.
Okay.
I don't think we need a report, but we have speakers. Let's.
Okay, I have 11 cards on 1A. I have Audrey George, the Red Chief Hunt, and Gina Viola. And this is relative to the donation of $35,000.
From the Los Angeles Police Foundation to be used to reconfigure the existing conference room into a community safety and operations center for the benefit of Operations West Bureau. Okay, that's what I mean. If your card wasn't for that, then go ahead. Good morning.
So every donation, every week.
Oh, sorry.
That has something to do with surveilling black and brown communities, which leads to killing them, arming the LAPD, which leads to killing black and brown people, compromising accountability, which leads to killing black and brown people. Anytime there's a donation, the LA Police Foundation has its fingers in it. And we'd really demand that the people on this committee that are involved in these kinds of donations, which is Commissioner Bonner and Shane Goldsmith, we demand that you learn more about this police foundation, which includes makers of the technology that the LAPD uses to kill black and brown people. This creates a cozy partnership by which the LAPD gets funding and technology donations for their expanding data-driven programs. And all of these consultants that are called in to advise you on these programs are incentivized to benefit monetarily from continued use of these same programs. The Community Safety and Operations Center is an expansion of the LASER program, which is now under audit. It proves the audit is a sham if you are putting technology in this command center, which you may never, if the audit proves that the LASER program is as evil as we know it is and as ineffective as we know. If you are not going to use those that technology in the command center, why approve these donations? We know that the audit is a sham anyway, and that you have already decided to continue the LASER program. Shame on you.
Next speaker, please.
The Red Chief.
Morning, sir.
Good morning and Merry Christmas to everybody.
Thank you, sir.
I see a lot of donations going out and a lot of donations going out to centers and things like that. I don't see no donations going to the people. And I'm kind of concerned about that. We're building all this stuff, but for whose use? The people or the community? And why wasn't the location put down on the paper of where this was going to be done? Everybody in here need donations for Christmas. Everybody in here need $35,000. You guys got to put the people first. Democrats solve problems and put the people first. So let's get it real. You can't stop crime by building a center. You can stop crime by building jobs for people. and that's where the donations should go, is to build jobs for people. The Red Chief Hunt.
Thank you, sir.
Gina Viola, followed by Adam Smith and Zach Sherwin.
Good morning.
Morning. The Community Safety Operations Center is an expansion of the LASER program, which is still in the process of being audited, which my colleague Audrey mentioned. Why put the technology and command center in place if you're not intending to fill it? Approving this funding directly reveals the LAPC's intentions to continue with the rollout of the program regardless of the harm done to the community or what right of folks have been violated. This funding is coming from the LA Police Foundation, a notorious favorite of LA police chiefs for providing quick funding for programs and technology that would otherwise have to undergo public scrutiny. Criminalizing areas and people by designating them as laser zones and chronic offenders prime officers in encounters where they will be more likely to use force. This leads to deadly outcomes for LA's Black and brown residents. Today you're going into closed session and you're going to hear about more residents that have been killed by police, directly related to this predictive policing programs that you've put in place. You are sending officers out into the field frightened, being told to be frightened, being told they are at danger and at risk, and creating this use of force that is resulting in people being killed. Black, brown, people being killed in this city regularly, because you're sending them out, telling them to be afraid, telling them that these spots are full of criminals, that there are chronic offenders. LAPD wants us to believe data-driven policing, surveillance, predictive analytics, and the use of programs like PredPol, LASER, and CSOC will be more efficient and race-neutral. In reality, it leads to more money being spent on increasingly oppressive layers of technology and surveillance, while communities lack basic resources and access to clean air, land, water, as well as services and spaces that are critical to healthy communities. Stop adding policing to try and handle these situations.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Mr.
Good morning,
Silverall.
sir.
So it's called a Community Safety Operations Center that's getting built in West Bureau in West LA. What's community safety to the LAPD, right? Like every year since 2009, maybe the sheriffs took 1 year, the LAPD has led the country, every police department, in the murder of disproportionately Black and brown folks. So it's laughable that something called community safety is coming out of the mouth of the police department. So I know that the coalition, the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, has been suing the LAPD, has been filing PRA requests for documents around the laser zones and the PredPol hotspots, and I think like what they're seeing is, as you all send more gang enforcement or these specialized details into these hotspots, into these laser zones, you're killing more people. And I'm wondering, Mr. Bonner and Ms. Goldsmith, if you know all of this stuff that's going to be happening in this CSOC, like you're this subcommittee, so who's going to be a chronic offender in West LA? Why, like, I know you live over there, Shane, as I do. I don't know. And these fucking donations that you all take. This year it's a donation because you can't afford it. Next year it's already part of the budget. Reject.
Zach Sherwin, followed by Steve Dacey and Tabitha.
Mr. Sherwin.
I also want to urge you to reject this for what it's worth. My predecessor highlighted the word safety in Community Safety Operations Center, and I want to talk more about that. It's ironic that that is the word that's used in the description, it verges on like doublespeak from 1984, because what these operation centers are used for are to gather and store and analyze and share surveillance data, which is then used to criminalize members of the community. And disproportionately, the members of the community whose safety is being name-checked in the name of these centers are black folks, brown folks, poor folks being most heavily targeted. Also targeted, more likely to be targeted, more vulnerable are queer, trans, and non-binary folks, disabled people, homeless, undocumented. And for people who fall into more than one of these categories, as so many do, the impact is even greater. So, you know, the word safety in that title just jumps out at me and just screams for having more attention paid to it. Other people are going to come up here and comment on other areas of this, but you know, we have to get our voices on record encouraging you to reject it. It's deeply problematic. Commissioner Soboroff, you opened by wishing everybody happy holidays, but the actions that the commission is taking are resulting in holidays that are impossible to be experienced as happy by so many people, including people who are in the room today.
Next speaker, please.
Steve Ducey, Tabitha Joliver, Jamie Garcia.
Morning, sir.
Greetings, members of the commission. My name is Steve Ducey. I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, Los Angeles, the chair of our Prison Abolition Committee. I'm also a member of the Central Hollywood Neighborhood Council, though I'm not speaking on behalf of them today. I think it's pretty shocking that a $35,000 donation from the LA Police Foundation is on your consent agenda and that you don't need to discuss this. I would be hard-pressed to know how many of you actually know what this Community Safety Operations Center does, what LASER is, what PredPol is, what chronic offenders are, what you get points for being on that system. I think it's pretty shocking that this data-driven policing that our new chief, Michael Moore, is so adamant about is somehow race-neutral when the points that are given out to people for this system are coming from the vestiges of a long-time racist policing system. If you're on probation because you were in jail under the previous regime of a racist policing system. You're on a gang database as young as 1 year old. You're in that system because of a racist policing system. So to think that these data-driven policing systems are somehow race-neutral is absurd on its face. Next, I want to lift up the fact that this money is coming from the LA Police Foundation. This is $35,000, which evidently there's not enough money in the $1.6 billion LAPD budget to pay for this. Imagine if that $35,000 was given to rent relief, or to after-school programs, or to things that actually lift people out of poverty and address the things that actually lead to the aberrant behavior that police are supposed to stop, the things that we have deemed as crime. Imagine if the $3.5 million that was on the balance sheet from the LA Police Foundation at the end of last year was used for things like supportive housing, drug treatment, the things that actually have an impact on creating community safety. This phrase that is so Orwellian, as Zach so astutely pointed out. I encourage you to have debate on this issue. I encourage you to pull it from the consent agenda. I encourage you to engage with members of the community who have concerns about these programs and reject this funding.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Good morning. My name is Tabitha Jolivet, and I'm so glad my colleague brought up the word consent. Because I want to talk about what we do not consent to when describing this investment, right, which is really what it is from the Los Angeles police who are donating this $35,000. We do not consent to the dehumanization and criminalization that continues in our communities. It begins with just basic stuff like the virtue that most of our community can't come to this meeting. And I know you've heard us say that. We've said it so many times, and yet your refusal to make meetings accessible shows that you can't be trusted by our communities. We do not consent to racist, data-driven analytics because, as we know, racism is socially constructed by those who are in power, and therefore we cannot endorse Those who are in power determining who is predictable based on socially constructed analytics that often lead to black and brown people's bodies being murdered. We can't consent to this kind of data-driven system, which gets framed in neutral ways by you, but what we know disproportionately harms and dehumanizes and removes the dignity of our people. We cannot consent to the narratives that you construct about what you do. Narratives of safety, for example, narratives of race-neutral policies. Because we know when we sit next to mothers in the room like Liz, whose son Christopher Escobedo was murdered by the police, and it took Liz to go to the police to figure out if her son had died. And the questions that were asked of her were not race-neutral questions. They were questions about whether or not he had tattoos, whether or not he was involved in a gang. So when the police...
Thank you. Thank you. You can come back during public comment. Thank you. Next speaker.
Jamie Garcia, please.
Next speaker, please. Is that no more speakers?
The next speaker is Jamie Garcia, followed by T. Guerra, Hamid Khan, and Michael Novik.
So there are more speakers, and speakers' voices are growing. The more that we are talking about data-driven policing, the more the community is coming out and realizing that this is just another way of racist programs to infiltrate our communities. If it's not Operation Hammer, it's Operation Laser. And the fact that monies for CSOC are going through right now, which we anticipate you will rubber stamp. We anticipate that you will not hear the multiple voices here that are actually showing up on a Tuesday at 9 a.m. to contest that you stop this program, you stop this money. We assume already that you will rubber stamp it through, just like the $1 billion budget that you put through when we were in Exposition Park, when we raised the exact same concerns about data-driven policing that you verbally said, Mon, that I don't want to get in the way of this. Well, we are asking you now, put your body in the way of this. Do not allow this money to go through. There is an audit that's supposed to be coming out. An audit that based on our presentation, that based on our pushing, that we raised this issue about data-driven policing, that you, the commission, came out and said, okay, this is a community concern. We had the room packed at City Hall, people concerned about this program, and now you have the audacity to push money through on the west side to expand this program. Because yes, there may be only 2 right now in Central Station, in 77th Station, but now the 3rd one is on its way. The 4th one we know is coming. We know about this expansion. We do not want this expansion. Reject this money. And we know for a fact that it wasn't the west side that you're concerned about. It's South Central, because that's where the assault started in 2016. That's where the CSOC was opened up in 2016. That's where all your data-driven algorithmic programs are being test run in South Central. That's what our bodies look like to you. Testing grounds, no more. No more testing grounds on our bodies. On
T. Guerra.
So what I want to touch on today is the way that Operation Laser and CSOC, which is essentially a command center from which the community is surveilled and from which units and missions are deployed, the way they talk about members of the community and the way they prime officers so that they are more likely to use force. Use of force policies rely on subjective concepts like reasonable suspicion and assessment of threat, but everything about these programs tells officers that these are the problem areas. These are the bad guys. These are the worst of the worst. We know who the bad guys are, and we are sending you on special missions to go and get them. This is how we hear and see and hear from members of the community that this is how people are being talked about. And we read this in LAPD's own documents. And Deputy Chief Dennis Cato himself tells us how Operation Laser is actually energizing officers and helping boost morale, and as if this is somehow a side bonus of the program. Officer morale has skyrocketed, Cato said at a police conference last year. Younger officers have been waiting for this kind of thing. At a conference this year, he said it was initially difficult to obtain buy-in from officers to focus on geographic areas based on a computer program, but once LAPD identified the presence of chronic offenders in these areas, officer buy-in was easily obtained because it is easier to sell a person to a cop than it is to sell a location to a cop. So this is the way the community members are being talked about in terms of selling people to cops. Sergeant Joel Miller, this is an officer who last year was assigned to surveil chronic offenders in Rampart Division based on a document that you all shared with CBC News. Officer Miller is not new to Specialized Task Force. In 2013, he was also engaging in so-called special problems units in Rampart. And what he said that year to Policing Magazine was, he described this work as, "We hunt what you fear." So this is how officers and supervisors who are engaged in CSOC and in Operation Laser are referring to community members as hunting them. That is.
Thanks. Next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Hamid Khan.
Come back during public comment and finish up. Mr. Khan. Next speaker, please. Thank you. You can come back during public comment and finish.
So Operation Laser, I mean, it's interesting. We have Dale Bonner and Shane Goldsmith, who are the two people of the head of the subcommittee that oversees data-driven evidence-based policing. I think the question to these individuals, I mean, looking at Dale Bonner, who claims to be this liberal person, and Shane Goldsmith, who's the president of the most progressive, supposedly, foundation in the country, Liberty Hill Foundation. Laser is Los Angeles Strategic Extraction and Restoration. And the argument for launching of that program was, picking up on my colleague Tiff Guerra, was to remove, like laser-like precision, to remove tumors from within the community. So these are the tumors that people sitting on this dais or this bench or these tables. So I don't know, Dale Bonner, do you know what a CSOC is that you're going to approve $35,000 funding?
Go ahead.
Because you're not giving me an answer.
No.
Shane Goldsmith, do you know? You should know a little bit.
This is your comment, not our comment.
We did try to inform you. So this is an architectural surveillance. This is all the pickup points where all the information goes into and fed into CSOCs as well. License plate readers, body cameras, CCTVs, high-definition cameras, various other forms of electronic technology, human-based intelligence gathering. And from there, individuals are identified and targeted. But we are getting close to that. We have identified people, Richard Risher and various other people who were murdered in laser zones. So these are assassinations. We have to name it. When we call the stalker state, it is the stalker state. When we call targeted killing, it is targeted killing. When we call assassinations, it is assassinations. This ain't anything new. This is not reminiscing and going back and sensationalizing the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. This is 2018, this is 2019 we're going into. Those assassinations, those targeted killings, that putting communities under siege is a normal practice. And that is where CSOCs come in, because they are the central nerve centers of deployment and launching these troops.
Next speaker, please.
Michael Novick.
Come back during public comment and finish up with your comments. Time's over now. Next speaker, please. Next speaker. Michael Novick.
Yeah, what are you consenting to when you consent to this on your consent agenda? Los Angeles Strategic Extraction and Restoration, that's a high-tech name for weed and seed, which was rejected and discredited. Extraction, the weeds you want to pull. Who are those weeds? Who are you extracting from that community? Black and brown people? Are you going to turn West LA into a sundown town? Gay people? Sex workers? Who are you extracting? And what are you seeding? You're seeding the technology of this surveillance that people just talked about. This is seed money from the companies that are going to get the contracts to put that technology into place. So that's what you're consenting to. This is outrageous. When you talk about, excuse me, data-driven, evidence-based policing, All policing is supposed to be based on evidence, but that's not the evidence you're talking about. Evidence in the policing context, you have a chain of custody of materials that you find at a crime scene. That's not the evidence they're talking about. The evidence you're talking about here is social evidence about who you think is a detriment to the community. It's about racial profiling. It's about targeting people. That's not evidence, not in the context of policing. So all of these misnomers are so much window dressing and tinsel that you're hanging on a tree. What can you predict about policing Los Angeles? I can tell you what you can predict. Based on past experience, you can predict that the LAPD is going to kill between 12 and 20 people next year. You can predict that the LAPD is going to shoot between 35 and 50 people next year, because that's the history, that's the practice, that's the pattern, and that's the policies you put in effect to make that more efficient and more effective murder machine. It's outrageous, and you must deny them consent.
Next speaker.
We have no other speakers on 1A, sir.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I will vote on this, approve this, but I did want to just acknowledge the concerns that have been raised.
It's her turn to speak now.
My turn, thank you.
Stop
I know that
disrupting
nothing
the
short
meeting,
of
please.
abolition of the police department and this commission will satisfy you, but I am very pleased by the hearing that we did several months ago. I thought, and the entire commission thought, that it was very productive, in particular raising issues about looking at a cost-benefit analysis of these programs and examining the disproportionate impact on people of color. And we take that very seriously. The former commissioners at the time did, and the new commissioners do, as does the chief of police and the inspector general. And the reports that are going to be coming out in the first quarter of 2019 are quite serious and very important to all of us. I look very much forward to the recommendations that come forward from the inspector general's office, and appreciate the police chief's earnest efforts to examine those issues to balance reducing crime and promoting public safety and community safety, while also examining the broader impact that these tactics have. So I look forward to those reports coming out in the first quarter of 2019.
We have a motion for approval, please. Oh, sorry.
So moved.
Okay. Do we have a second? Shame on you. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. So moved, 4-0. What's next? What's the next one? So I'm going to ask you all to stop disrupting the meeting. If you can't stop disrupting the meeting, then the meeting will stop anyway. Go ahead.
The next item is 1C, sir.
Number C.
And we have Michael Novick.
Mr. Novick, Michael Novick. This is item 1C.
Yes, this is 1C. This is another foundation. Apparently you have a whole supply of foundations. This is the Air Support Angeles Foundation. I'm glad that at Dale Bonner's initiative, you're going to do an inventory of how much money has been donated week after week, year after year to the LA Police Department on top of their budget. But I'm curious how many different foundations there are. You have the Los Angeles Police Foundation, the Air Support Angeles Foundation, which I assume is dedicated solely to the Los Angeles Police Department Air Support. And how many other foundations are there pouring money into the LAPD on top of all the money that you take out of the city budget? So I'm also curious about this Air Support Division. Does the Air Support Division have any authority over the drones, or is that exclusively SWAT that deals with the drones, and which is Special Weapons and Tactics, and exposes the fact that the drones are weapons in the arsenal of the LAPD, and part of this new technology of surveillance that you're using to identify people are the drones that you have being equipped with facial recognition technology. Are they being created to be autonomous of any piloting and able to pilot themselves and target people with that facial recognition? So all of these are questions you need to ask yourselves when you approve these donations for $10,000, $35,000. This week alone, you're approving for about $48,000 on top of the budget. I think it's completely irresponsible to consent week after week to these items without examining the policies and practices and the pattern of surveillance and racism that these technologies approve.
We have no other cards on this item.
The motion for approval on item number 1C, I'll move it. We have a second. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. Let's go to item number 2A, regular agenda items. This is the department's report Third quarter report on homelessness. Come on up. Morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Dominic Choi. I'm the Department Homeless Coordinator. And I have with me today Guido O'Neill from the City Attorney's Office, Gina DiDomenico, also from the City Attorney's Office, and Amy Perkins from LASA here to help with this presentation. So I won't go over all the numbers in this report, but I will summarize some key points and then talk about some initiatives, and then we can open it up to questions for all of us. So victimization for the third quarter of 2018, it increased by 96%, or 464 victims that are homeless. This increase was primarily driven by aggravated assaults, thefts, and robberies. We believe this increase is twofold. We had a lot of effort in coding better, tracking our crimes better, so we believe that caused an increase. Also, we believe there was an increase in victimization in the homeless population. We also looked at our arrests. So our felony arrests, third quarter, there was a 12% increase, primarily driven by what we call other open charges, but we looked deeper into that, and it was parole violations, the 3056 of Penal Code. Criminal threats and thefts also drove that number as well. Then we looked at our misdemeanors, our release from custodies, and our personal service citations. All three of those categories had decreases. There were decreases in narcotics open charge arrests, failure to appear warrant arrests, sleeping, blocking the sidewalk, citation or release from custodies were reduced by 268, and personal service citations again went down by 92, or 17%.
So wait, so you're saying that people who are experiencing homelessness, the Part 1 crime against them is up by 96%. They are the victims. Correct?
So the number of victims increased by 96%.
By 96%.
The crime itself.
And the number of arrests, though, the number of arrests
15%
are down or up?
No, up.
No, up by 15%.
The felony arrests.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. And then looking at our mental evaluation unit and their response to crisis calls. Even though their overall calls went down, their response to calls related to homelessness increased 15%, or about 180 calls from third quarter this year to last year. Again, I tried to research and find out what caused this increase, even though the overall calls went down. And what I'm hearing is the senior lead officers assigned to MEU Mental Evaluation Unit have been out there messaging. And when an officer has multiple contacts with the same person and hasn't typically called MEU because they didn't meet the criteria, what MEU has been doing is asking for those particular officers to call MEU so they can come out to the field, do their own assessment with a clinician, and make a better determination. And so I think that, and it just happens to be that the majority of those calls happen to be for persons experiencing homelessness where they're having multiple contacts. So I think that's part of the explanation of why it has increased. Again, I don't know that we'll ever know 100%, but I think that's a contributing factor. Then looking at uses of force, we saw overall citywide increase of non-categorical use of forces third quarter versus third quarter of 4%. But when we look specifically at homeless-related non-cat use of forces, we had an 8% increase. We also saw that the overall non-cat use of forces for persons experiencing homelessness was about 30% of all of our non-categorical use of forces. It may seem like a high number, but I looked back to first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter of 2017, and also the first two quarters of 18, and it typically ranges between 27 to 33%. So we're not decreasing, we're not increasing, but again, this is a population when we're sending officers to, much of the population suffers from mental illness, substance abuse, and those issues, when officers have to deal with them, become challenging, and sometimes use of forces occur. But I will tell you that we're still continuing our emphasis on de-escalation, preservation of life. That is emphasized in all of our training that we do. We're still offering 2 classes a month of mental health intervention training. And I think one thing of note, our dedicated homeless officers, our HOPE officers, our Transit Service Division HOPE officers, they've had 0 use of forces in that same time period. And then you look at our reset officers, you have 50 officers in Skid Row that have had this training. They only had 3 use of forces in all the number of homeless contacts they've had. I think we're doing well in that range. We can always do better in use of force, and we'll continue our emphasis in de-escalation and preservation of life. Let's see. Regarding our dedicated homeless effort, I won't go over every number in the chart, but if you can see the general trend, Hope, Reset, and Transit Service Division, Hope. If you look at the number of contacts that they're having, and then you look at enforcement versus outreach categories, you can see that the outreach categories are significantly higher than enforcement. And I think that has a lot to do with the posture of the department. We lead with services, enforcement is a last resort, and all of our training, multiple contacts, outreach, education, before we take an enforcement action. And then let's talk about some of the initiatives that we're involved in. So again, we continue to support safe parking and bridge housing. We've seen a success in El Pueblo. September 10th, the first one opened in the city. We had it at capacity on the first day. We couldn't locate a couple people, but by the end of that day, everyone was located and placed into that shelter. Safe parking. Recently, I met with a pastor at a church talking about the benefits of safe parking. LASA has worked with our senior lead officers in helping identify locations for safe parking, which they have followed up with and opened up safe parking locations. We believe these things, shelter and safe parking, are long-term solutions for getting homeless populations off the streets. Let's see, our Narcan program. So in May, we launched a pilot program for naloxone or Narcan to address opioid overdoses. So we had 85 units deployed in the field.
Yeah.
And as of the end of September, we had 5 deployments. We saved 5 lives. To date, we had 2 more, so we have 7 total. We have plans and almost there by by January, we should have 5,000 plus units out in the field to all of our first responders. We've made significant progress in training the trainer, having the fire department train all our training coordinators, and and they're rolling it out to all their officers at their divisions. Let's see, we've, in order to track our data better and become more accurate in what we do, in the third quarter of 2018, we issued a notice for the coding for homeless victims and homeless suspects. And then we also issued everyone a homeless stamp. So if it's homeless related, they stamp it and they can circle the victim or suspect, and that way it gets coded properly. We also issued a notice for the use of the 1942 transient address. Oftentimes, officers, if somebody doesn't want to give an address, they just put 1942 even though the person is not homeless. So we just put out a reminder notice saying, hey, if somebody is homeless, we use this address. If they have another mailing address or is just not giving you an address, let's do some work to find out what the proper address is and put that address. So trying to refine our data capture so we have a better picture of what we're dealing with. And then the amnesty program.
Would you stop disrupting the meeting, please?
You're disrupting the fucking meeting.
Okay, so this is your last warning?
So the amnesty program for low-level and nonviolent offenses, currently we're working with the city attorney's office and the courts. We want to obtain a list of all outstanding misdemeanor warrants, identify which ones will qualify for this amnesty program. And although the details are still being worked out, we'd like to provide amnesty or dismiss a certain number of warrants that are aged, possibly 5 years or older, and take the more recent violations, citations, arrests, current arrests, bookings, and look at a robust diversion program where somebody can go in and get services, and in turn they get their fines or their community service or their penalties reduced or removed. That's the post-arrest type of diversion. We're also currently working with the county and the city attorney's office on the LEAD program, law enforcement assisted diversion. That's a pre-booking type of diversion program where officers will identify, and a pilot is being rolled out in the Hollywood division. So officers will identify somebody who qualifies, whether it's narcotics related or prostitution or vice related. They can take a person, call a case manager, have that case manager connect with that individual without physically booking that person or putting a charge on their record, creating more barriers for services.
Ms. O'Neill, you want to comment on?
Sure. The program is just rolling out in Hollywood, I believe, in a few weeks. It's the first time there's been a LEAD program in the city. There is one in Long Beach and other areas. The project started in Seattle originally. It's one of those programs that will take time to look at to see the data because it does try and really get to the root of the problems. The key component is it provides housing. So everybody who goes in the program gets housing, which is so key, I think, to any success in any of these programs. So it's starting small. It's only opioid arrests in Hollywood. I do believe the county's looking to expand it, so our office will explore looking at that as well as other diversion programs.
Okay.
And then some of our partnerships in the Unified Homelessness Response Center. Now LAHSA and sanitation have put full-time individuals in the Unified Homeless Response Center, but it's the same person every day. And so I think that partnership is building, and they're working more collaboratively together, and they're getting a lot done. We are truly leading with services in there. I think Amy can talk about some of the efforts that are happening in El Pueblo with our, the enhanced enforcement zone, but it's really turning into an enhanced outreach zone, and we're having a lot of success there. You want to talk about that a little bit?
For sure.
Morning. Thank you.
Yes, I started going out there the first day, which was October 10th, which was 30 days after a bridge home opened at El Pueblo called El Puente, the shelter. And we went out in partnership with LAPD and with sanitation and just said, let's do this a different way. Let's not start with some really heavy-handed approach. So from day one, sanitation and PD just stood back, and the outreach workers led at the beginning. These are outreach workers that have been out there for more than a year, so they have long-standing relationships with people experiencing homelessness in that area. And these were people, when we started, who obviously hadn't accepted to go into the El Puente shelter. So we're still maintaining this outreach relationship, really trying to motivate people to consider shelter, and then obviously continuing, if they're interested in a more permanent housing plan, then we're fully able to say, hey, you can go from street to home. You don't have to go to shelter. And what we've seen now, here we are 2 months in, and it's still completely outreach-led every day. If you come out there, you'll see outreach walks up first, education is done. There's very little enforcement that happens. I've not seen one citation written. I've been out there many of the outreach days. And it's really been incredible because what you're seeing if you walk around El Pueblo is that people are taking their tents down and there's no threat being given. It's because we've done this really soft approach. Education on what 5611 means and what compliance with that means. And so what we found is this relationship building has been incredible. I was out there one day when there's one couple that has had a very long history of domestic violence in their relationship, and it was very escalated that day. And I was nervous what would happen for them. And PD was kind of stepped in that moment, waiting until we said, yes, just step in a little bit. I was concerned for the female safety. The entire situation was de-escalated. There was no result that arrested. There was no arrest result. It was incredible to see. I mean, and they took a long time to do this de-escalation. Everyone really invested in it. And by the end, PD had walked off, outreach had come up, and I personally stayed with the gentleman over an hour who's now said, let's talk about shelter. We got to look at a new way of doing this. It was really incredible. So it's working really well there.
At the end of the day, I noticed that the number of hypodermics and knives and razors is just like in some places going up by 400%. Any comment on? I mean, that's just like off the charts.
Well, this is one of the reasons, though, that we're really advocating for more Sharps containers. We've seen it be incredibly successful at El Pueblo. Those containers are full. Mm-hmm. So we're really advocating for that to become a priority for people. Yes, addiction is an incredible problem for people who are suffering. Mm-hmm. Many people who, when we get them indoors, will no longer suffer in their addiction, will be able to regulate their use. And so we're really advocating, I'm always advocating for more support for people to get opportunities for treatment if that is what they want. But it takes a while. It takes this relationship building. It takes leading with outreach so people aren't afraid to kind of get vulnerable and say, okay, I'll consider an alternative. But always we always want more containers out in the field. But addiction is a major problem.
Before we start questions, and I know there are a bunch, anything else you guys want
to add to that, it may be the harm reduction model that all of the C3 teams are taking. Mm-hmm. They're probably doing a lot more needle exchanges, and so there's probably a lot more people that are getting rid of their old needles knowing that new ones are coming. The numbers are quite astonishing, the amount of needles that are being collected. They really are.
And there's sharps containers at not all, but some of the pit stops that are out there. And also an initiative that the department is encouraging that we expand on because it's been very successful.
And then one thing that we're also looking at in our office is we try and offer services throughout the court system, but the court system itself, when we end up in misdemeanor prosecutions, does not have a lot of services there. So in our meetings with the county, we've been asking for either the service provider leads or someone step in and provide more services in court. The prosecutors end up acting in that respect a lot, trying to find services, trying to find rehab for people. It's not always a good fit for us trying to do that, so trying to get more services in court would really help, I think, a lot of people as well.
Okay.
Good morning, Commissioners. I just wanted to add a few updates on the HEART program, which is the criminal record clearing project to help individuals experiencing homelessness or at risk to clear citation infractions. We've added to our staff, so by January we'll have doubled to 6 staff members. Our events will have gone from 1 or 2 per month to at least 1 per week. Last week, for example, we hosted 3 events. And we've shifted the way that the program operates with the support of the commander. Rather than asking individuals to complete community service off-site after engaging with us, we bring all the services on-site. So an individual is given credit for all the services they engage in, be it talking to the LA County Department of Public Health about the flu vaccine, talking to Department of Mental Health about mental health services, registering for shelter, getting clothing, taking a shower. Those are all things that count towards their obligations, so that when they leave with us, their obligations are satisfied, and I'm able to ask the court to dismiss those infractions. So that's been a positive development. Completion rates have increased from 30% under the old program to over 80%, and we're still improving those figures. In order for individuals to learn about our events, we've added a phone option, so individuals can call and get a full list of our calendar of events every month, and we will have those numbers posted and shared. And the CAP parking program has created a flyer that is now accessible to officers so that they can have that information as well.
Great. Chief, would you like to weigh in, and then we'll go into questions?
Just in the context of the number of victims and and as well as the individuals identified involved in crimes that were believed to be or reported to be experiencing homelessness, in the context that we are seeing, I think, 2 attributes here. One is an awareness, much greater awareness on the part of our members that when they're investigating a crime, whether it be a violent crime or a property crime, the role of homelessness in regards to the victim or in regards to the suspect. The offender, the person that's accused. And so with that awareness, you see an increase, and that began in 2016. And in 2017, we began more earnest, and even as much as this year in 2018, the attention during CompStat inspections and other processes, I believe it's being brought front of mind to officers as to this issue of what level of any did the issue of homelessness, which is in of itself a bit of a subjective category. For instance, a burglary or a crime of, say, a battery that occurred in the street. And when we talk to the victim, while the victim may or may not report themselves as experiencing homelessness, they may describe the suspect and describe the suspect as an individual they believe to be experiencing homelessness. So these are not perfect measures. These are scales of magnitude. In regards to scales of magnitude, I think it's also important to point out that for total Part 1 crimes, the 947 victims that are reported here, that the level of increase is what percentage of the overall crime they represent. In regards to reported Part 1 crimes, year to date and at the time of this report, the end of September, we had 95,000 Part 1 crimes. And in regards to violent crimes, we had 22,000 Part 1 violent crimes. What is disturbing in here is overall is that while we have seen an increase, or we have seen an overall decrease in the number of homicides and in shooting victims in the city, that we have seen an increase in their representation by those people experiencing homelessness. And so today, or as of year to date, 39 of our 245 homicides, we believe the victim was experiencing homelessness. And so that is a disturbing change. However, also, it is an area that we're pursuing with our investigations, our outreach and engagement as an effort to improve the stability of people experiencing homelessness. These are very at-risk populations. both for violence upon within their group, but also being subjected to violence. And also that in the taking a step back, that while this is 16% of our overall homicides, gang-related homicides still account for 58%. So the challenges that the department has is multi-factor in regards to violence on the street. And we see this increasing, and I'm proud of the work of this team, as well as what this team represents from the Unified Homeless Resource Center, of a multi-pronged strategy. And in the metrics today, where you see a decrease in arrest data relative to blocking the sidewalk, shopping cart violations, that officers are finding and gaining compliance, as well as outreach workers, without having to resort to those. However, we still will use those sections as when we're encountering individuals who we don't have alternatives. And in the areas of increase in arrests, they're increased in arrests in areas of serious offenses, and which we know that within this population, these populations of individuals, these are more than just numbers, these are lives, that in there are individuals that are preying upon others. And so our officers' investigation of that and pursuit of that, I'm encouraged by. And I just felt that in the framing of this, that those added attributes were of value. Lastly, you will notice in this report an expansion or continued expansion this year versus last year in the identification of other strategies that the department is working in a unified manner with all of our partners that we want to continue to pursue and we want to focus on. We are starting experiments such as the distribution of trash bags to homeless people experiencing homelessness in an effort to police their own areas that we're not seeing success. In other areas, we're trying new initiatives. And I'm hopeful that as we move into, and I believe as we move into 2019, that the expansion of showers, of laundry facilities, of increased sanitation, of increased outreach workers across 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that mental health workers, that mental health having a permanent seat at the Unified Homeless Resource Center, that those are all strategies that the department can not only support, but we can encourage and seek additional funding and support for those agencies to be able to achieve, because those are the strategies that I believe will make the lasting impact on improving this humanitarian crisis that we're in the midst of.
Thank you, sir. Commissioners?
Thank you for this report. I just want to say how incredibly proud and appreciative I am of the work that your team is doing under Chief Moore's leadership. Seeing the numbers decline so significantly as a result of your multi-pronged effort is very important to me, and I think a really significant step in the right direction. I really appreciate everything that goes into that. I do have a number of questions, which maybe just to save time, I will just lay them all out and then you can respond to them. I also just a couple of things specifically want to acknowledge the naloxone use is really really happy to see you putting that to use, and also the coding and the homeless stamp for folks who may not be totally aware of the importance of that. I mean, it really is critical so that we can have a full analysis of who's victims of crimes, who are suspects, and who's getting arrested and cited. And it's, although it may change the numbers from year to year, it's very useful, and I know that's a massive effort to make sure the data is coded correctly, so I appreciate that. So just, of course, we're, I think, all very concerned about the increased victimization. Would appreciate hearing just how the department is approaching protecting people who are experiencing homelessness from crime. Also would appreciate a little bit of reflection on why the decrease in arrests and citations. What are the sort of outreach and other activities that you believe are most contributing to the decrease of arrests and citations of the offenses that are consequences of people experiencing homelessness, not the felonies. Would like to hear a little bit about the training that you're doing for SLOs and other officers around community relations. I know that we've talked with community leaders and developers of affordable housing about some of the opportunities that the department has to weigh in when on citing issues of shelters and affordable housing developments in neighborhoods, and making sure the department's doing everything they can to support citing. And so would like to hear, I know you've done some really proactive efforts to train officers on that. Also, obviously very concerned about to see that the percentage of use of force against people experiencing homelessness is 30%, whereas they constitute it sounded like about 4% of violent crimes, just kind of understanding what you think is contributing to the high incidence of use of force against people experiencing homelessness. And then finally, interested from LAHSA on what you think the challenges are when I'm so pleased to see the high number and increasing number of referrals from the department to LAHSA, but then continue to see very low numbers in terms of uptake on housing and services by people experiencing homelessness. And then finally, this is more of a comment, just want to share that in past commission meetings on this subject, we've talked about having the department explore possible approaches to diverting calls about people experiencing mental illness. And there's, of course, a large overlap with people experiencing homelessness. And wanted to share that report is going to come out from the department in the first quarter of 2019 to look at possible ways to divert those calls to more appropriate services and intervention. Similarly, we've looked in this meeting at programs in LAPD jails to provide services to people experiencing homelessness to reduce recidivism and improve the reentry process for them. And that report's also going to come back in the first quarter of 2019. So looking forward to seeing how those efforts will contribute to our collective efforts to address homelessness. And that concludes my long list of questions and comments. Thank you.
Okay, let me see if I got this. So victimization, it's up 96%. Again, I think a lot of it has to do with accurate coding. We're comparing it to 2017, where I don't believe we were as accurate as we are today. So that's one portion of it. Second portion of it is, I believe there is more victimization occurring in the homeless population. Again, I liken it to, I gave an example of one of my staff when we talked about this, is if I'm sitting in my house every night, the chances of me becoming a victim of a crime is a lot less than me sitting out on a street every night. It's just what the situation is for that particular individual. It makes them more vulnerable. That's why we call them the most vulnerable individuals in our society, and that's why we need to help them. I will tell you the efforts that we're doing is homelessness, victimization is becoming more and more of a discussion every day in crime control meetings. Every time an individual or a command talks about a homeless-related crime, we ensure it's coded properly. We want to make sure that there's proper services out there. And that if it's a particular crime that everyone's being victimized by, that we have a proper strategy to address that. It's being addressed in CompStat. We're going to have a crime-driven only homeless CompStat in March, our first one. So rather than having all of our partners come in and just discuss what efforts they're doing, which we discuss weekly anyways, we're actually going to have a crime-driven CompStat so the commands can tell us how they're reducing victimization and increasing arrests with homeless suspects. So hopefully that addresses your victimization question.
Thank you.
As far as messaging with shelters, safe parking, what we're doing to talk to our senior lead officers, so we've done a lot. Back in June, we had a meeting with all of our senior leads citywide at Deaton Hall. We had United Way, we had LAHSA, myself. We talked about a bridge home, really the facts versus myths. What was it all about? Because back then the Pueblo location was not open yet. We also talked about safe parking and what services they offer. We listened to the senior lead officers and we provided them some guidance on what or how to talk to community members and what the facts were. And I think that was needed. But on top of that, we continue the cross-training program. We have every bureau will loan a HOPE officer or a senior lead officer to the HOPE team for 1 month, and it just continues to rotate. This has been an ongoing cross-training program. And with the hope that these senior lead officers will understand and build relationships with LAHSA, with sanitation, and when they go back out to their divisions, they understand about leading with services and outreach and have connections to the service providers and sanitation so they can address problems in their community locally. And then lastly, what we just started, Josh Rubenstein and I have been visiting each division and their SLOs and their SLO sergeants and talking to them specifically about messaging, listening to what challenges they face, what are the challenging questions that they face from community members, reconfirming the department's posture with leading with services, enforcement as a last resort. So it's a continued messaging discussion effort. And then we've asked these senior leads to talk to their basic ACAR officers and spread the same message and this information. So we're trying to be persistent in our communications and then trying to spread it further and further. What I think we've learned is when we try and do mass messaging and have all the senior leads in Deaton Hall come in, it's really we just throw out information. There's not much time for a real intimate dialogue about what the challenges are. Going to each division and talking to small groups one at a time, it takes longer, but from what I'm seeing now, it's being much more effective, and they're being more receptive, and they're actually thanking us for doing it.
Excellent.
So that's the messaging and the senior leads. So use of force numbers. Again, I think that ratio has been fairly consistent. I don't know for how long, but I know at least for 2017 and 2018, it's been in that 30% range. So our non-categorical use of forces are roughly 30% homeless related, or 30% of our overall non-categorical use of forces. The individuals that we deal with when somebody has a mental health crisis or has a substance abuse crisis and can't control themselves, those are some of the most challenging incidents when we ask our officers to go and handle the situations. And unfortunately, some of those turn into use of force incidents. Again, we continue with our training, with de-escalation, with preservation of life training.
Commander, could I interrupt you on the training component?
Sure.
Because it struck me when you were describing this, the officers who are specially trained in this area, and I'm thinking particularly the HOPE officers, I think you mentioned didn't have any uses of forces. And so what can we do to improve the training that officers not on those teams are receiving so they too can handle these situations without always a use of force or frequently a use of force?
So I think we need to continue with our mental health intervention training. But I just want to point out that the dynamics or the environment in which these officers respond, so our patrol officers are responding to crisis calls, 911 emergency calls. Our HOPE officers are not. Right. You see that reset, even though they deal with individuals experiencing homelessness every single day, but they are also responding to crisis calls. And they're highly trained, but they still had 3 use of forces. Sometimes it's inevitable. When we do encounter those use of forces, we try and use the minimal amount of forces we can. We are emphasizing de-escalation and preservation of life. And I truly believe, I think the chief mentioned to me that officers are injured more frequently than in the past, and we want to look deeper into that analysis to see if it's because officers are using their hands-on techniques rather than other tools to de-escalate issue or use force. That's something we'll look into in the future.
And Commissioner, if I would just echo that in regards to actually put some stats behind this, at the end of November of this year, the non-categorical use of force, which is the vast majority of times in which a reportable use of force occurs, just at 1,944 at the end of November, so 1,944, and the total number of contacts with the public at that point is 1.6 million between radio calls and calls for service and stops that officers conduct. More than 700,000 stops. So of that less than 2,000 instances, that is even with what our numbers were last year. We have seen a 16% reduction in the number of injuries to suspects, to individuals that are involved. So just over half of those instances resulted in an injury to the individual in which we're engaged in that non-categorical use of force. 659 of those instances, or 659 officers, were injured, reported an injury during that encounter. So that is a number that, while we have a 16% reduction in reportable injuries to the involved offender, the person we're affecting this use of force with, which is encouraging. But numbers are 34 additional officers this year versus last. But our efforts also is to balance and ensure that our officers are protected and that they're using strategies and tactics and not overextending. At the end of the day, as Commander Chow indicated, the nature of the encounter between a radio officer at 3 o'clock in the morning coming upon a situation is much, much different than the HOPE officer.
So I hope I answered all your questions.
Thank you. Yes, that's really impressive work. And also just wanted to acknowledge the very important work at the City Attorney's Office in pre-arrest and post-arrest diversion. Really appreciate that.
And just to follow up and to appreciate the work of the City Attorney's Office, my question is about more generally, if you could speak about the support of the courts in this effort. I assume they're supportive of all the dismissals that are taking place, but I did note that I think there's an increase in warrants for failure to appear, And many instances, as you know, it's perhaps an inability to appear. And I just wonder if you can speak briefly on that issue and how those issues are handled with respect to individuals experiencing homelessness.
Sure. I think the court is trying to really get in, update their system. They have a new computer system, trying to make it more efficient, also looking at the warrants that they're pulling in. And I don't know, Gina, if you want to talk about it too, because she sees a lot of these warrants in her heart clinics. And we're trying to do innovative ways of trying to dismiss those and work with the courts too.
So one thing that the county and the court system have done in conjunction is try to raise the awareness of what's called the inability to pay petition. So an individual who has failed to appear or failed to pay, and it's been maybe months or maybe years, now has the ability to go back into court and ask for a rehearing. They have to fill out just a one-page petition and give it to the court clerk, and they can have a discussion with the judge about their inability to pay, get a pay reduction, or get community service. It's newer. It's taking the place of what was the amnesty program that was statewide. So there isn't enough awareness about it. So one thing that Gita and I have done is worked with the county to talk about strategies to raise awareness of this. We're talking about creating a YouTube video that can be shared throughout social media channels. We are talking to Neighborhood Legal Services about creating a training tool that can be shared with librarians and other first responders. As you know, the libraries are often a place where a lot of individuals go during the day to use the internet, the bathroom, et cetera. So that's one of the strategies to address that.
Thank you. I had, I guess, just an observation and then a few questions. The broad observation is that the report's very descriptive and filled with a lot of rich data that seems to highlight the various issues of the problems. It's a little more difficult to find in some of the areas a tighter description of what the solution is or what the department's really doing about some of the areas. Some of that could be user issue, in terms of how I'm reading the report or not. But let me just ask about a couple, and then maybe you can reflect on it here, but also just in regards to future reports. So my first question was about the victimization data in Table 1, and you did, I think, in response to the question. My first question was, with these numbers, what are some of the things we're doing about it? You mentioned a few things in terms of the issues being addressed at some of the meetings, the better coding, and the CompStat that's beginning in March. And that's one example. Was there any reason why that information just couldn't be just included? I mean, the data, just presenting it as it is, for me, kind of just calls out for the question of, okay, great, what's being done about this? You gave some replies, so the question is there a reason why that kind of information could not have been included in the report?
No, there's not. But we really don't know what percentage has to do with coding and what percentage really has to do with true victimization. So I'd rather be able to explain it to you verbally and answer any questions and have a discussion rather than put something in concrete where we really don't have an exact answer to. We know coding is better and we know people are being victimized. We just don't know in what proportion. Okay. On the, I think this is on page 16, this is in the section of the report that's on the updates, and there's a conversation about, a little snippet about the partnerships and training with the Sheriff's Department. And there again, at the end, there's a reference to a pilot program that's going to start in the first quarter or the fourth quarter of 18. And another example, is there any more detail in terms of what that pilot will consist of and what we should expect? Yes, and I don't know if pilot's the right word, but I know it's in here. So what we did was we sent some of my personnel over to the Sheriff's Department, and they have a 2-hour block of first responder training for persons experiencing homelessness. It's taught by Lieutenant Diedrich, who's their homeless coordinator. And so I wanted to, there's been a push for us to coordinate with them and utilize some of their methodologies. So I wanted to do an assessment of the program before we just said, yes, let's just start doing what you're doing. So we had our folks go over there, sit through the training, have discussion, and I will tell you, it is very, very similar to what we are doing. I think we're doing a lot more, quite honestly. We really are. So so the next step in this is, rather than bringing their first responder training to all of our folks, I think our next step in this pilot would be to, now we're going to join them in a collaborative type of response to an encampment to see what their protocols are, how they address it. And I think what we're going to see is that the county has much more robust resources than the city does. And that's where we need to really focus our efforts. You alluded to some what the solutions are. The solutions are more housing, more service providers out on the streets, and when we show up in an encampment to mitigate that encampment, that we have more service providers than we do cops. That's the ultimate goal. And so we'll see when we do this cleanup with them, or this effort with them, but I think that's what we're going to see.
If I could just add, too, the team that comes with the sheriff, it's an E6 team, and Amy can probably detail this more, but it's a medical team, a housing navigator, a substance abuse counselor, an entire array of people coming from the county to this cleanup. And in our city, we have a LAHSA outreach worker. They're great, and Amy can speak to that. But the level of complexity they have with their team is much deeper than what we have. So they really probably have a great success rate from that as well.
It's true. When you can leverage an E6 team, an E6 team is going to have a classic case manager, but also a mental health worker, substance use specialist, a peer counselor. So they are a much richer team. There are times we certainly can leverage them, and we partner very strongly with the E6 teams. But sheriffs, being the county agency, can pull on the E6 team in a way that we just can't. So we can always respond with a LAHSA generalist team. So those are 2-person teams. Well-trained teams, trained with the E6 teams, but again, don't have that depth of services. And then we have our HOPE teams, but again, those are 2-person teams.
You have some of the officers here that actually are in the field.
So we do have a senior lead officer that's
I'd
involved
like to
in the
hear from
cross-training
some of them.
program.
Yeah.
The senior lead officer cross-training program, he's now on loan to HOPE right now.
In the meantime, before we leave this issue, so
everybody, not just the boss, everybody, come on up, you guys. Come on up. Come on up. Please.
Prada, she's in our Unified Homeless Response Center.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you want...
Yeah, no, I'm not done. So
Okay.
I'm not done yet. So, whoever, I'm going to direct my questions. You got the star, so you
Yes,
can
sir.
deflect it to whomever you want. But so even on the last issue, there's discussion about some helpful explanation about some of the resources and those kind of things. What I'm trying to understand still is that was highlighted in response to some digging and some questioning here. Is there a way that we can include and that the future reports can include a better discussion of that kind of issue in terms of this? What I'm pointing out is that this, is, and maybe it's intended to be this. So feel free to let me know exactly what this report is and what it isn't. But what I'm saying is it's in a number of areas very rich in data, which is highly descriptive. But in terms of helping us understand the conclusions that we should draw from the data and what might be done to further assist in addressing some of the issues, that part of it is what I feel like we're bringing out in discussion in terms of questions. Let me just get a couple of quick ones. There's a discussion also about another pilot program where the Department of Mental Health psychiatrist is beginning to work with you on some of the pre-crisis intervention and the HOPE teams. Is there any detail on that pilot and where it's going? And
So there is a mental health professional working with our Transit Services Division HOPE team funded by MTA, and they are out there 4 days a week for a limited number of hours. And what the intention of that psychiatrist is to be able to do a quick assessment to if somebody needs to be placed on a 5150 hold or directed to other services. That assessment can be done immediately out in the field, as opposed to calling mental evaluation unit, having SMART team respond, and so it's much quicker and efficient. Again, it started at the end of 2017, and we haven't seen any data. What I think we might see, and I won't be sure until we get the data for fourth quarter, we'll see an increase in 5150 holds from that Transit Services Division unit, HOPE team.
so we'll hear some more about this one in the next
Yes,
report.
Okay.
And then
we include their data.
A couple other quick ones. There's also then this is on the sidewalk accessibility in the tents, and there's a comment that the department's committed to the solution that includes the management of personal property size, such as the exchange of larger tents and so on. But I'm not really clear in terms of what the department's role is here and how you're contributing to the solution.
Well,
with regard to the tents. I mean, you're not handing out tents. You're not doing any of those kind of services.
Let me weigh in on this. So, if I could, because this is of my prodding of this. So first, and more broadly, the nature of the report in these qualitative efforts is working with the commission is to provide a primer. But the level of detail, this is a report that has grown over the last 3 years in its depth and complexities. And clearly, as a department, we will be happy to deepen these areas that's responsive to individual commissioners' concerns, so that you feel you're more, so you have a better understanding of what we're actually accomplishing or not, and what our challenges are. The tent issue relative to these structures that are in these public spaces is that they have grown in their size. They have grown into being 15, 20 feet wide by so-and-so. I mean, to the extent of large, expansive tents, that we are trying to identify the source because they're not necessary for the individual per se, and their mere presence forms a curb to building blockage in many of these areas in which individuals are choosing to set those tents up. So there has been initiatives in the last year and a half to how do we work with our partners. This is not a police department-led matter, but how do we make sure there's not a Hobson choice here in the sense of the tents are being distributed, and by extent of that distribution, they're blocking the sidewalks and ADA access issues. Just popping the matter up in the places in which they'll be going. You can drive up and down San Pedro, numerous streets here in the Skid Row area, as well as other parts under freeway overpasses. What I've challenged the team is working with the Unified Homeless Resource Center is to problem solve this. What are alternatives? Where might those tents and structures be sourced from so that people who need shelter and benefit from a temporary shelter that a tent can provide can also do so in a manner that doesn't create the obstruction that we see today. And so this is an area that in a problem-solving effort of the organization, the whole second portion of that report is really the problem-solving efforts. It's really the areas of what are the added strategies that our teams working with a larger shared responsibility of all the other partners are engaged in. And I want us, in our report before this commission, to prod us along, us as a city and as a region, into being more successful, instead of what at times has been, what is the police department doing about these matters? We are not the tent distributors, but we need to prompt the problem solvers around the table to say, hey, we've got to stop whatever the source of this. This reminds us of when people are committed, charitable organizations, well-intended, are doing food outreach, and they're providing food for people who are very much desperately in need of substance, but then they leave trash and debris and waste in those same neighborhoods, which compound the problem. So there's a responsibility of using that strategy effectively to provide for people who are at risk to nourish them, but also to clean up. Just as you wouldn't serve poisonous food, you're not going to leave that material without policing that area so that the public's not endangered. So this report is meant to, as it moves into 19, I look forward to that second half of the report, becoming more of a half of the report, which can give this commission, as the leaders of this organization, an informed ability to understand how do we advocate with the Board of Supervisors, how do we work with the Mayor's office, and work with other city and public and private entities to improve our response to this crisis.
Yeah, I would say that's helpful perspective, and I would say that that's kind of what I'm referring to, because it's really not the second half of the report. It's
the second.
You had 16
10%.
pages of data, right, and then 6 pages of the discussion of some of the initiatives. And unfortunately, I know because you don't want a 1,000-page report, but that's the area where you're looking for most of the information on really what can be done. But you're seeing a lot of the high-level, comments about the level of commitment and programs that have been started or meetings or things that are ongoing. And it'll just be helpful to have a little tighter focus, really, in the future on where those programs are going, so that we know what to expect and what to ask reasonable questions about. Thank you.
Chief, I appreciate too the last comment you made about normally our role is to oversee the police department and to deal with police department activities, but if there is a role that we can play in supporting the mayor's efforts and the department's efforts and advocating from our perch as seeing the consequences of this and seeing the reality that law enforcement can only play a very limited role, and really appreciate the efforts, the leadership efforts you take to play as much of a role as you can in coordination and problem solving, and as minimal a role as you can in enforcement, which is an extraordinary thing, I think, for a police department to do. But whatever role the commission can play in supporting those efforts to get additional resources, access to E6 teams or whatever else to improve the efforts of the department, I think that would be something we'd be interested in knowing.
I'd like to hear from some of the officers.
Well, first, do you want to introduce yourselves and actually explain what you do, what your role is?
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Imada Tingarides, and I am currently the officer in charge of the Unified Homelessness Response Center.
Did you talk your husband out of retiring, please?
Yes, I did. He's building my shed at home right now.
Good morning, Commissioners and Chief. Officer Canizales. I'm a senior lead at 77th Division, and I am on loan this month to the Cross Training Hope Detail.
Good morning. Sergeant Maya Mason. I work Operations South Bureau. I am the Hope Unit Sergeant for the South Bureau team, myself and 10 officers.
I'm interested in the differences, where you see the progress and also what you see in the next quarter and the next year of places that we do need help, whether it's from service providers or mental health support, et cetera.
I'll touch on my role from the Unified Homelessness Response Center perspective. We've had a lot of coordination with Department of Disability, Rec and Parks, Sanitation, their watershed and solid side, and Department of Transportation. During the fires, the UHRC was very instrumental in coordinating and ensuring, one, during the rain, that our HOPE teams were going out into some of these vulnerable areas, helping with LASA outreach workers to ensure that there's shelter or locations for them to go to keep them safe. Coordinating that with fire, from my perspective, was huge in ensuring that we all had a coordinated effort in addressing some of these vulnerable locations. I think I'm very happy to hear you talk about E6 teams and more resources. We just came back from San Francisco and we visited their HSOC, and the level of commitment from their city controller and all of their general managers was truly impressive as it relates to what we're trying to form here at the UHRC. I think the relationships being built and the resources going into this effort is huge. And the responsibility and everyone getting together to address it has been extremely instrumental in the new ABH site opening. We have Schrader coming within the next couple of months in Hollywood Division. We now have a good blueprint of what we need to do as it relates to our HOPE teams and the special enhancement cleaning zones in those ABH sites. We've seen a decrease in tents and homelessness centered around the new El Puente location. So I look at this work and I think this is such a huge problem to try to solve. And it's not a police issue. It's a balanced, coordinated issue, and everybody has to be on board. So that level of commitment from the UHRC is huge. The mayor's office has been extremely instrumental in ensuring that we have that level of commitment from all the agencies involved. And this problem will get solved. It's going to take a long time and a lot of coordinated effort, but I see the difference and I see the change, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do together.
Thank you. Thanks for what you do. Sir?
Some of the positives that actually is going to benefit me is having the ability to reach out to the resources. Me being a senior lead in 77th Division, my area consists of the 110 freeway from Vernon to Slauson to Vermont. And we all pass the 110 freeway, we look up and we see those tents in the housing up there. So my role was just dealing with it myself, reaching out to resources, but not establishing the relationships with the different entities. That's going to make my job a lot easier. Now I can do a one-on-one. But the biggest thing that I find is that you're trying to build a relationship with somebody who's a victim or being homeless. So the experiences that have come to me coming in and wearing that police uniform and trying to establish a relationship with somebody, they just look at that uniform and they're like, it's hands off. I don't want nothing to do with you. But coming into wearing a different type of uniform, which this is here, it's a little bit softer looking, and you can gain more compliance and you can gain more resources and stuff like that. So those are the things that it's helpful, because before they think that we're just there to throw away their stuff. So already we have a bad experience with them, and then really at the end of the day, it's not a police issue. It's a resource of sanitation that they come out. So a lot of times in the past, early on, I've been a senior lead officer for 10 years. Before we would show up with LASA, and they would already know, okay, the police are here. It's a bad situation. We don't want to talk to LASA and get the resources. Now we have a different partnership. We have a better relationship. We've learned, and we're actually doing positive things to help the homeless to get the resources they need. But it's overall, it's just going to make me better at my position. It's going to help me educate the officers in 77th Division that not only is it just the responsibility for the Hope Unit, but it's the responsibility of all police officers in the city of Los Angeles to understand what's going on with the homelessness, the increase in that.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
What I've seen working the last 2 years with the Hope Unit in South Bureau has been a great, for my eyes, has been a great improvement. Units were formed, officers were brought in that have a capable to communicate, to get messages across to individuals that are experiencing homelessness. So if there's a outreach worker working side by side with us that says we have an opportunity for you to get you out of this situation, that's our ultimate goal. Our ultimate goal is met right there. The individual says, yes, I want to get out of my situation for whatever it may be. We don't judge that situation. They get in their vehicle with LASA individuals. They're on their way. They're on their way to a shelter. If they need help with if they have a narcotic problem and they need help, we're going to get them a narcotic rehabilitation person to come out to them, talk to them, and hopefully get them in a clinic, get them help. If there's a domestic situation and we need to deal with the courts, we have a city attorney that's assigned to us, our detail, that can help us get them through the courts. When they go to the jail, the services again are offered. There's always a source there to help them, to better their lives. That's the ultimate goal of our unit, and that's the instruction that we receive. We've placed lots of families and individuals on their own. There's a recent article that says it takes 17 contacts before somebody decides that they're going to take up that offer. So we'll go back to the same location 4 times a week. The officers get to know them, they feed them, they give them clothes, they work with them, but they also say if you're going to be living on the streets, there's some legal ways that you have to do it. So we try to make them as clean as possible by working with Bureau of Sanitation day by day. And that's the city of Los Angeles, so it improves our entire community. So our senior leads come on loan. We try to instruct them with all the same instructions. We have no uses of force. Our de-escalation is there every day. The ability for the officers to keep communicating to the people that are homeless is the most paramount. And we've really progressed. So,
good. Sir?
Thank you, sir.
You didn't get a chair up, but you got one now. Come on. Sit right here.
You sure? Well,
where are you working now?
Good morning, Commission. And Chief, I'm Officer Aratani. I work under Sergeant Mason for the South Bureau Hope Team. I've seen a vast improvement in the way we communicate with the homeless, our ability to de-escalate. It's a position that I find requires a lot of patience in the way you articulate how you're going, in the way you articulate to an individual experiencing homelessness, what path you want them to take, how you want them to better their lives. And we're just we try to articulate the best we can with sanitation there and LAHSA. Like my sergeant said, that if you're going to experience homelessness, that there's certain rules you need to follow.
Good, thanks. Thank you for taking the time to come up, and it's very helpful to us. Do we have public comments on this item?
Yes, sir. We have 9 comment cards.
Okay.
We have Michael Novick,
Everybody.
followed by the Red Chief and Yvonne Michelle Autry.
Michael Novick.
Yeah, I think in terms of board action on this, you should not just accept this report. You should forward this report to the mayor and the city council with the recommendation that since it's not a policing problem and that resources are needed that we are not providing even compared to the sheriff's department and the county or the city and county of Los Angeles, that resources be diverted from policing to what will solve the problem. In other words, it's not a crime to be unhoused. It's not a crime to be addicted. It's not a crime to be suffering mental illness. And so the solution, as the officers have said, is more resources. Those resources have to come from somewhere, and the biggest pot of money in the city is the money going into the LAPD. So I urge you to recommend to the city council and to the mayor that they immediately start diverting resources from the LA Police Department. Shane Goldsmith, you said dismissively that people, will be satisfied with nothing short of abolition, but people have made very concrete demands and proposals, and this is another one. So the city council and the mayor need to also change their commitment and the efforts of the city that have been escalating gentrification and displacement that leads to homelessness and people losing their homes and losing their housing and being forced to live in the streets, and should reverse those policies of gentrification and displacement. And so if you want to play a concrete positive role, those are some recommendations you can make. In other words, the solution, if people who are disproportionately black and brown are forced into homelessness and people who are unhoused are disproportionately the victims of crime, if you want to reduce crime in the city of Los Angeles, provide people with housing.
Thank you.
The Red Chief.
Michael, hold for 1 second. Sergeant, I missed you. Did you want to come up and say something? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. You turn off your radio, or whoever's got their...
Is it my turn or her turn?
Oh, it's her turn. Go ahead.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Selena Robles. I'm a sergeant with LAPD. I'm Commander Troy's aide. And I just wanted to share that we always message to our officers and our staff that we lead our services and we use enforcement as last resort. As a matter of fact, just on Thursday, myself and Lieutenant Diedrich with LASD went to a training for LAHSA where they had approximately over 100 of their outreach workers present, and we shared with them our LAPD operations and how we communicate. And what we're trying to do is basically enhance that partnership where we outline what their responsibilities are, what our responsibilities are, so we can have a common goal, which is ending homelessness. So that's all I just wanted to emphasize, that we continue to work together to improve and reach that goal of ending homelessness.
Okay, thanks. Sorry I didn't call you up before. I didn't see you.
No worries. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thanks. Michael, go ahead, sir. Any overlay to this, or just sit back?
Wait, the message is that this problem has been going on for a long time. I'm going through this right now. I'm going through the homeless problem right now. I'm homeless, and I'm looking for a house. And I see the difficulties and the struggles that you guys talk about, these people, the tents, the whatever. I've been down there. I know what the problem is. They don't want to see these people. They want to see people like us helping them. People helping the community. Suits and ties, you guys look good right here. Response to LAPD with the uniforms, that don't work. And it's what you guys put into it. Everybody needs jobs. The 50% of the gang members need jobs. Every time I submit something for a gang member, it turns into nothing. So I know the problem. I know why they got to go out and deal on the streets, because I watched it, I lived it. I know what I know what it felt like. If I were you, Dr. Herschel Swinger taught me 10 years of work with me, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours a week. You guys don't understand the bureaucracy of what's going on. She says homelessness is because people don't have jobs. The other part of it is they can't live in four walls. So you put them in their own community. Stop bullshitting. The Dulo master knows what to do and how to do it, but they don't want to listen. And he's paid a lot of money to do it. But you guys got to adopt a policy to get everybody out before 2018, before the Olympics. So, you know, that's where the $365 million come in.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
The next
Thank you.
speaker is Yvonne Michelle Autry,
Okay, Ms. Autry.
followed by Gina Viola and Carlos Montes.
Yes, I'd have to support with Michael and also what both Michaels just said. This is not a police state. Well, it is, but we're objecting to that. And the money that has been invested in the development of this police state and the martial law that we appear to be under should be diverted to creating real venues that are serving the community. The homelessness is an industry, so it is about the money, because much of the money that is supposed to be per federal or state or county or city allocation is not dispersed in the community. So that is a fact. It's money, just like the prison industry is an industry. The weapons industry is an industry. The hospital, it's industry. It's not about healing. It's not about helping people to re-enter. It's maintenance of this status quo, which is a very much a white male Zionist status quo, or the wealthy, or the Illuminati, or the evil, keeping certain people subjugated. That is the basis of capitalism, and that is a hidden caste system in America. And the police are the pawns and maintenance of this hidden caste system, and has always been. First, of course, recovering escaped black people. I see a segregation. Okay, the street people are predominantly black people, and I'm sick of seeing black people in the street. So this is legalized segregation. It's a containment and extermination of black people and people that you do not want to see. Extermination, put in the street where they are subject to experimentation. I've been labeled homeless. I've been experimented on. I'm a single black woman, housed, thank God, but per your stipulation, still homeless, subject to invasions. I'm stalked. I'm tired of bids and police magically appearing wherever that I am. And it could be a civilian making these reports, but I know it's the SAR, and it's the facial recognition. Okay, my skin is fair, but I got black lips, and I still got black features that offend you people. So I've been put in this category of black women and other.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Gina Viola.
Yeah, come on back during public comment and finish your speech. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Come back during public comment. Let's go to the last warning. Sorry.
So in the presentation, I heard the officers say, we'll never know what the increase is caused by. It's caused by the LAPD's presence to handle matters that they shouldn't have anything to do with. What causes the increases that you're seeing is the increased policing. Safe parking and housing shelters should have nothing to do with the police. Nothing to do with the police. You have criminalized the houseless for so long now. You've convinced the public at large to be so frightened of poor and sick humans that they don't even want to put shelters or affordable housing in any of their neighborhoods, because you've convinced them to be frightened and that they have something to be frightened of. Policing has created the homeless situation in this city, 100%. I echo what other people have said here. Give that money back to the mayor so that they can utilize it in ways that can be helpful. You had officers up here, more than one officer said, this is not a police matter. This is not a police issue. 2 different officers said that while they were stating what it was like to try and handle this matter. Give the money back to the city. Chief Moore, you said trash bags to police themselves with. Is that the strategies you want for more funding to handle this? To hand out trash bags? Let somebody else do that. You heard all of your officers say they don't want to be, houseless people do not want to be approached by police. They do not. There are other people well equipped to handle these matters. There are other agencies on the street. LA Can is doing incredible work every day. Give them that part of the budget. They will fix the houseless problem in this city. They need the resources to do so, and they know how. Thank you.
Buenos dias. My name is Carlos Montes. I'm a member of Centro CSO Community Service Organization. Many of you new people don't know me here. I'm also a member of the Boyle Heights Neighborhood Council, past president. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Neighborhood Council today. You know, it almost felt like I was at a service provider meeting this morning with all the terminology that LAPD was using about de-escalation and respect for life, preservation of life. But in Boyle Heights, we have a homeless problem, which is caused by too many police harassing, arresting, and killing our young men, okay? That's the way I see it. We are a victim of gentrification because of the overdevelopment Jose Huizar and the mayor has pushed into Boyle Heights. Many of our homeless people are actually Boyle Heights residents that have been forced to live in their cars, live in the park, live in old beat-up RVs because of the high cost of rent. And the police harassment. We have too many police harassing our young men, getting them on probation, getting them into jail, unable to get jobs, unable to provide for their families. From February the 6th, 2016 to January the 14th, 2018, we'd had 8 Hollenbach police killing of young men. Then the one on January the 14th, 2018, Christian Escobedo. Many of our young men are grad students, like Christian Escobedo graduated from Lincoln High School, had no police record, no gang affiliation. He was killed on the streets of the East Side. So I agree with the comments that we need money for housing, for intervention. LAPD gets the bulk of the money of the city. So as an advocate for Boyle Heights, we say take the money away from LAPD, give it to the parks, to the services. The city pays more money in lawsuits than they fund our parks.
Thank you, sir.
Stop the police killing, justice for our community. Stop killing people in Boyle Heights. Okay?
The next 3 speakers, please. Tabitha Jolivet. Hamid
Next
Khan.
speaker, please. You can come back during public comment, sir.
Tabitha, I just want to go on record as offering a public comment in case it gets reframed as something else. What I'd like to specifically address is the warnings that I've heard today. Mr. Soboroff, I'm talking to you in particular. And I've been taught when I see things like this, respect for people, that one of the ways we show respect is to actually pay attention. So I'd invite you to pay attention because I'm talking to you directly. I've heard you warn people with language like, stop disrupting the meeting. Stop disrupting the meeting. This is your first warning. This is your second warning. I find that really interesting. I also find that it's interesting that there is language like reverence for the law, but respect for people. I think that's an interesting juxtaposition to consider when we think about the discourse that gets used in meetings like this to continue the dehumanization. Discourse like rules, help, entities, data, enforcement, safety, support, coordination, legal, predictive, policing, trash bags so that people can police themselves. All of this discourse, I want to suggest to you, is blame-shifting discourse. It's a series of euphemisms to describe the conditions that people actually live in. So yes, Commissioner Shane, this is for you. You're right, we will accept nothing short of dignity. And that means abolishing the police. It's not a passive aggressive remark to silence us, right? Which is what I found you doing, which is disrespectful. But it instead is a way to reverence not the law, but people. Because people are what deserve reverence. Human beings deserve reverence. Albert Ramon Dorsey reserved reverence for humanity, his humanity. Christopher Escobedo and his mother Liz, who is sitting with us, deserves your reverence.
Next speaker, please. Thank you. Your next speaker, please.
The next speaker, please, Hamid Khan, followed by Adam Smith and Steve Dursey.
Thank you, Tabitha, because I think one of the things that you clearly lifted was that the spin is on.
That's right.
That the co-optation of our language is on. That how, in its own way. But I just want to quote, last year we had hosted the UN Special Rapporteur on homelessness and poverty. And this is what Philip Alston had to say, that homelessness in this scale is far from inevitable and again reflects political choices to see law enforcement rather than low-cost housing, medical treatment, psychological counseling, and job training as the solutions. One of his staff member, Leilani Farha, went to say that in the frickin' richest country, a relatively stable democracy, it's so base. I mean, fighting for the right to sit, fighting for the right to shit, fighting for the right to sleep in a tent, people are being annihilated here. But what do we have? I mean, in 2016, the city controller released a report that out of $100 million that it's supposed to go to homeless services, 87% goes to LAPD. So it's the policing of the problem. But I want to bring back the data-driven, evidence-based policing. Dale Bonner and Shane Goldsmith, how much are you familiar with laser zones and anchor points and the use of city attorney's office in using those for the kind of citywide nuisance abatement programs, which leads to eviction and displacement of more people, which leads to more homelessness as well? This is what Operation Laser is. At the heart of Operation Laser is gentrification. That's what's going on. So what you're doing is, on one hand, you're speaking from both sides of your fucking mouth because you're talking about homelessness, but you're rubber stamping CSOCs and you're rubber stamping the same goddamn policies that are going to exacerbate the condition and cause more homelessness as well. That is a tool for gentrification. That is a tool for displacement as well. What about hotspot policing and Predpol? We have been filing public records and getting information. There's a digital redlining going on around Skid Row. It's like this noose that is being placed around Skid Row with hotspots in Financial District and hotspots in Grand.
Next speaker, please. Who's that? We want to call the
Adam
next speaker?
Smith.
Your time's,
Adam Smith,
thank you.
followed by
Your time's
Steve.
over, and then you can come back during public comment. So your time is over. You're disrupting the meeting. I'll ask him to leave the meeting now. You can take him out. Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please. Mr. Khan, you can leave the meeting, sir. You're continuing to disrupt the meeting. Mr. Khan, you can leave the meeting. Noted that he's continuing to disrupt the meeting. Yeah. Yep. Thanks, Mr. Khan. Yeah. Okay, so you want to stop? You want to stop now? Ladies, that's your last warning, or you're both going to be leaving. You're both going to be leaving. Both of them are out. Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, please. Other people would like to speak. Other people follow the rules and would like to speak, but you're taking their time. Out of the meeting, you're continuing to disrupt. Continuing to disrupt. Go ahead. Goodbye. Next speaker. You're already out, Mr. Khan. You're out of the meeting. You're continuing to disrupt. Okay. Happy holidays to you too. Next speaker.
The next speaker is Adam Smith, followed by
Smith.
Steve Ducey.
I do want to just name how thankful I am for the three people that just left. The three people that come every Tuesday morning and just speak truth to power in this terrible, terrible place. Regarding this agenda item, I also want to name that it's like these reports, all of these reports and the meetings that are held, all the pats on the backs and the, you know, amazing work, and all it is to justify more money for enforcement, right? There's no like end game here. How much money can we get to the police? How much money can we get to sanitation to cure the ills of homelessness when, like Hamid said and others said, you know, this problem is created by the disproportionate resource management, right? Like stealing resources from the community, putting it in policing is exacerbating this fucking problem. Mr. Bonner mentioned the accessibility of sidewalks. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the LAPD colluding with the owning class, with white wealthy folks in Venice putting these planters up all over the place to displace unhoused folks. Last week I mentioned it to Chief Moore that his one of his sergeants in the Chief of Staff's office, Sergeant Sapp, who I talk to weekly, mentioned that it's not a police issue, right? These planters that are displacing human beings aren't a police issue, so their hands are tied. Pete White from the Los Angeles Community Action Network talked with Valerie Flores in the city attorney's office last week, who said that these are misdemeanors. So it is a police issue. It's just not being enforced. We see what's being enforced. We see where this money's going.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next speaker.
Steve Ducey.
I want to start with some comments that I heard from a police officer at Days of Dialogue earlier this year in Hollywood Division. He said, the way we're grown as officers is military academy style. They break you down to build you up, building people without emotion. Cops are not fucking social workers, all right? And we've heard it enough times from officers today. I've heard it enough times from officers in Hollywood. They don't want to do this work. They don't want to be garbage men. They don't want to be social workers, and they shouldn't be. Missing from this discussion is that in the Bridge Home program, there's $29 million set aside for cops and enforcement. That's more than is actually going towards the shelters themselves. That is disgusting, all right? And if it weren't for DSA Street Watch, the enhanced enforcement around El Pueblo would have been worse from day one. This soft hands approach that Lasso is doing was forced by us. We were on the ground filming your officers, your Hope teams, the people from Mayor Garcetti's office, and their hands were tied because they knew that we were watching them. And that's why Legal Aid Foundation Los Angeles and members of DSA were meeting with the mayor's office to talk about these enhanced enforcement zones. You should not have a shelter surrounded by police officers. And yet that's what we see at El Pueblo. That's what we're going to see in Hollywood. But we're going to be there, and we're going to keep watching you, and we're going to hold you accountable because you're not holding yourselves accountable. Furthermore, sanitation was shamed into putting a trash can near El Pueblo by us. It wasn't there until we shamed them into putting it there. And then we watched sanitation and police officers stand around while it was overflowing and didn't empty it. And so we said to them, hey, you're sanitation. Why don't you empty the trash can that we forced you into putting out by El Pueblo? And they finally did it. So yeah, I mean, the point stands. The UN, who are disgusted by the situation of poverty and homelessness in this city, somehow our mayor was going to be giving a speech about the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Well, we shouted him down, and we stopped him from giving that speech because it was a sham. All right? This is a sham.
And we have no other comment cards on this item.
Okay. Let's go to the chief's report. Morning, Chief.
Sir, you have to take action on the report.
Oh, okay. We have a motion for approving the department's report. We are not approving transmitting concurrently to the mayor and city council. Do you have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. Thank you. Item number 3, report of the chief. Thank you for coming, everyone. Chief?
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning,
and, happy holidays to you and your families and to the audience today. Relative to the significant events this past week, we had no categorical uses of force, meaning no officer-involved shootings or in custody deaths or other actions that would constitute a categorical. I'll start my remarks there. We did see this past Saturday our cadet graduation, the Leadership Academy of 391 graduates. So I'd like to thank our Inspector General, Mr. Smith, as well as Commissioner Vice President Decker for attending that. We also attended last Wednesday a youth summit at the Harbor area. We had about 60 individuals, young high school students, that met with me, and we sat down as part of our ongoing forum and outreach efforts. Moving into our crime picture, we continue to have an overall reduction in both violent and Part 1 crime. We have 29 fewer homicides, which is a 10.6% reduction. That's 245 homicides this year versus last, 245 versus 274. As I remarked earlier, we have seen an overall reduction in gang-related homicides of nearly 22%, but the area that is causing us concern is the increased numbers attributed to persons experiencing homelessness. Overall, our violent crime reduction is just over 1,000 fewer violent crimes, and our total Part 1 crime reduction is 2.5%, which is 3,185 fewer crimes in the city, Part 1 crimes that have been reported. Moving on, a couple other statistics. We have had 41 fewer victims shot this year versus last, and 173 fewer victims that have been shot this year versus 2 years ago as we end and approach the end of the year. For officer-involved shootings, we remain at 31 officer-involved shootings overall. That's versus 41 last year, which is just under a 25% reduction. Our 4-year average is 38. We've had 11 fatal officer-involved shootings this year. Last year, that number was 15. Our 4-year average is just over 17. So we continue to see a reduction in this area. Moving over to our traffic stats in regards to our Vision Zero efforts. Traffic collisions overall, the number of fatal traffic collisions are slightly under last year, 224 this year versus 229 last year. Recognizing the significant challenge we have in this area remains our pedestrians. While we have seen a reduction of 7 fewer pedestrian deaths this year versus last, they remain at 118, so well over half of our fatal traffic collisions involve pedestrians. Primary factor on that continues to be distracted driving, suspected DUI driving, as well as distracted walking. Move over into our personnel numbers. Our sworn personnel or payroll is 10,033. Our civilian personnel on payroll is 3,004. I want to take note that that's the first time in my recollection in the number of years that we've actually surpassed 3,000 civilian personnel on payroll. I am grateful for the ability to continue to rebuild our civilian ranks. 10 years ago, there was 3,600 3,600 civilians on payroll. The importance of that is that as long as we can continue to rebuild our civilian civilian work groups, it'll enable me to take and place more and more officers out of administrative positions and back on critical needs in our streets. Year to date, we've had over 50,000 additional radio calls this year versus last, and that number compared to 2012 is over 100,000 radio calls. So the workload in the street has increased for our rank and file, and our ability to continue to bolster and restore our civilian ranks will not only allow us to free up sworn members who are doing civilian tasks, but also allow us to add added services such as the restoration of some of our regional jail operations. Lastly, in regards to our reserve officers, we stand at 387. We continue to have a level 3 class in progress, with the goal of having an additional line level reserve class in March. And we have 1,428 cadets that are active. And that concludes my remarks, and I'm available for any questions.
Okay. Commissioners, questions? Okay, do we have any comments on the chief's report?
We have 4 comment cards. We have Michael Novick, the Red Chief Hunt, Yvonne Michelle Autry, and Adam Smith.
Okay.
Yes, I'd like to read from the LA Times Sunday. Dozens of retired Los Angeles employees are collecting such generous retirement pay that they exceed pension fund limits set by the Internal Revenue Service, saddling taxpayers with additional costs. Their lavish pensions forced the city to establish an excess benefit plan to pay what the pension system cannot legally cover, using money that would otherwise be tapped to fix sidewalks or fight homelessness. Goes on to talk about former Chief Pasinger and then former Assistant Fire Chief Emil Mack both collecting over $1 million in drop payments. Then it says, joining them soon at the top of the list will be current LAPD Chief Michael Moore, who got a $1.2 million drop payment and started to collect his $240,000 annual pension when he retired briefly earlier this year. He's now collecting an additional $350,000 per year in salary from city taxpayers. So I'm wondering if Chief Moore is willing to turn some of that money over for housing to solve the problems that we were just talking about. I mean, I'm retired from LA Unified. I get about $3,000 a month. He's getting $1,000 a day in salary and $80,000 a month on top of that in retirement, on top of a $1.2 million lump sum. The IRS restricts pension fund payouts to $220,000, so even his regular retirement of $240,000 exceeds the limit set by the IRS. The other question I have is whether LAPD has any policies and programs in place for autonomous vehicles, both in terms of traffic safety with autonomous vehicles and whether the LAPD is involved in any plans to develop autonomous police vehicles, because the Army is moving to have autonomous tanks, and you're already flying drones, which are autonomous flying vehicles. I'm wondering what you're doing about robocops.
Yvonne Michelle Autry, please. Adam Smith.
Yeah, I always like to support what Michael Novick and Michael Hunt and all of my colleagues have to say about this very real police state. So that our money is being used to finance the attacks on the homeless at all who do not submit to this hidden one world government's caste system. So that is what the police is implemented for. The drones, I continually to object to the drones because they will be armed in extermination, further extermination of those who you cannot control. So the police are being used now, of course, with the population and depopulation, escalation of this depopulation effort. I'd like for this record, for the man that spoke, many of the innocent victims, I see black and Hispanic. They're sacrifices for those that are not criminals by PD who are devil worshippers, Illuminati, low level, and they all are low level pawns. So you're being given directives by the higher level Illuminati who are Zionist Jews who work with the mafia. So I want this on the record. The police that order the mafia to attack me, okay, again, in collusion and in working with the counterintelligence and the FBI, okay, to maintain this status quo. I want this to stop because you're liable. You're taking orders, you're pawns, but you also have a responsibility in the choices that you make. You're incriminating innocent people, you're murdering innocent people in maintenance of this status quo because your fear of loss of power is imminent. And it's not just the Zionist Jews, it's the black tokens, okay? It's all of you who have chosen, okay, to have this collusion or to cling to this system, which we don't want. And we're fighting it, and we will continue because you are liable, because it's on the record. We do not want the police state. Like this gentleman said, I work with LA Can. Invest in organizations that are...
Next speaker.
Not attacking, harassing,
Smith, please.
making sex slaves out of women. We're not going to be serviced here. Okay, I'm not in service, and I object to your Secret Servicemen harassing me daily, trying to break me down, and hiring and soliciting the mafia, who are the immigrants who need help, or they need money. So you're paying them to use electronic weapons, to abuse and to torture people.
Mr. Smith.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, furthering the past few weeks' conversations, if these things that are exacerbating some of these issues, because when folks get displaced, obviously they might end up somewhere else in an encampment or whatever, which leads to further criminalization. If these planters that are being installed by wealthy residents to displace unhoused folks are in fact a misdemeanor, which according to the city attorney they are, why? I just don't understand how Valerie Flores, when Pete White pushed her and said, why aren't you, and I'll misquote him, but, why aren't you prosecuting or criminalizing these with the vigor that you do the unhoused people. And she said, well, it's not that simple. So how is, like, it seems pretty simple to me. Like, if me and a bunch of friends went down to Home Depot and bought $1,000 worth of wood and built an unpermitted structure in the middle of a public fucking sidewalk, it would be a police issue. And so I just don't understand how these are going in every day, every week. Now they're putting like metal tubs so they don't actually have to build them. I'm sure you've seen the picture down next to the Staples on Palms and Lincoln. But they're going in around Venice, around the city, every day, every week. And every day that you all don't do anything about it emboldens these rich people to be like, well, you know, the police are on our side, which you are, obviously. But you can't, like, be talking about caring about unhoused folks, patting each other on the back for, you know, outreach when you're complicit in creating the problem and not doing anything about it.
We have no other comments on item number 3. We're now on item number 4, public comment period. We have 12 comment cards. We have Luis Carrillo, Michael Novick, the Red Chief, and Ambassador Dwayne Moody.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm old enough to remember the words of Willie Williams and William Bratton and other police chiefs who always told us every year that there would be new improvements in training, a new and improved LAPD. However, the enormous failures of this city to train its police officers has resulted in one officer killing 2 Latinos within the span of 12 days, leaving 2 mothers grieving. Elizabeth Medrano is one of them. And so, in spite of all the good things that you say about training, the fact is that the officers are still poorly trained, or they're not following their training. There's situations where use of deadly force should not have to be used. Other means should be used. And officers really forget about the maxim of de-escalation, and they quickly escalate a situation where they take human lives away. And in the police manual, there is a section about reverence for human life. And that's what officers have to be drilled into their muscle memory, to have reverence for human life and not quickly pull out the gun and start shooting. And because of this poor training, more mothers are needlessly crying that don't have to be crying. And I fear that other mothers in the future will also cry for their loved sons because police officers, again, will not be properly and adequately trained. It's a question of training, muscle memory. But we see it, I'm old enough to have seen it over 20, 30, 40 years. The police officers are killing individuals. Too many Latinos and blacks are being killed by police officers from the LAPD. Thank you.
Michael Novick.
Yeah, I'll make my weekly recommendation that you take these meetings out of the police administration building and hold them weekly outside in the community in the evening so that you can get a much broader community participation, since you insist on trying to drive out of these meetings the people who are able to come and show up here. I'm kind of shocked also that President Soboroff, looking down, but specifically said in relation to the report on homelessness that you were not voting to forward it to the mayor or city council and make any recommendations. So again, you're constantly derelict in your duty to the city and the job you're supposed to perform. The last thing I want to say is the whole concept of de-escalation. De-escalation implies that there already has been an escalation that you're trying to back off from. And what is that escalation? If you come up to a homeless person or a mentally ill person or anybody on the streets and you're wearing a handgun and a taser and handcuffs and a expanding baton, That in itself is a use of force and an escalation. I don't understand why you can't get that through your skulls. I mean, it's not that hard to understand. You're weaponizing people on the police department. You're weaponizing the vehicles. You're weaponizing the body cameras. Everything is based around a paramilitary operation. That's the escalation. Anything you do to try to back off from that is insufficient. So if you want to de-escalate the situation, you need to move towards exactly what Shane Goldsmith talked about, abolishing the police as an occupying army and an internal border guard inside this city. You don't like that term, you want to smile at it, but that's how it functions. And if you were experiencing it the way the people who come here to testify to you are experiencing it, then you would not smile about it. You would not smirk about it. You would not laugh about it.
Next speaker, please.
Ambassador Dwayne Moody, followed by Terry Akins and John Avalos.
Warm spiritual greetings to the inspectors, to the chief, and to the full panel, commission panel. Hi, I'm a 45-year-old producer with films, television, and music with Motown. I come to you to appeal to each and every one of you. I needed some assistance. Back on June the 2nd, 2008, I had a vehicle that I purchased out of town in Oklahoma. It reflected the vehicle of my late client, Norman Whitfield, the songwriter-producer who produced it. I heard through the grapevine and just my imagination, Beauty's on his skin deep, and so on and so forth. And I'm producing his documentary called I Heard Through the Grapevine. This vehicle was legally parked, and I was not present when it was impounded. And when I came back to where it was at, the neighbors told me that it was impounded. I went to the Pacific Police Department. I inquired why my car was impounded. They said because it's an out-of-state car. And I said, well, I need to be able to get my car out of impound. I went a couple of days later to get it out of impound with the DMV fee. It was a total of $800. When I went in there, I saw it was damage done to my car. I immediately told the inspector at the toll place that my car is damaged. Okay, they took pictures and so on and so forth. They got back to me. They specifically said, no, we didn't damage it. The officer damaged it when they tore up your car cover, trying to tow the car and stuff. I went to the Pacific Division. I made a report. I'm getting nothing but the blow off on there. It's been going on close to a year. It looked like the statute is going to expire. My most important thing is holding up my filming of my documentary. I need to be able to get some resolution. I appeal to the board to help me.
Mr. T.
Sir, Detective Jones in the back, raise your hand. Detective Jones, right there. He'll help you outside the room, sir.
Okay.
Detective Jones right there. Go see him, and he'll take care of you.
And I have the package to
Right.
leave.
Detective Jones will be able to help you.
Thank you for your
You're
time
welcome,
and
sir.
your ear.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, hello everybody. John Avalos. I was here last week and I was the last one to talk, and I sang a song with my jarana. Did anybody find my journal? I left my little black journal up here. Nobody found it? Anyway, I just want to, I wish that the officers that were here earlier didn't have to leave. The social workers didn't leave. I wish they would stay and listen to the rest of us. And thank you, Tabitha, talking about the writing on the walls, because the other day I talked about the ones over here in the front. It shouldn't say, it should only say the LA Police Department. You know, I appreciate you. You're a department. This is a meeting of the police department. This is not a civilian oversight of commissioners. No, it's not. And I wish those officers would have been here to hear me say it, whoever I am, whatever powerless figure I might be, I wanted them to hear me say that. And the mayor doesn't want to face that reality that he appoints you because you're looking for something in the future. It's a stepping stone for you. And it's sad that we have to come here early in the morning on a Tuesday. Once in a while it's cool, but you still don't want to establish in the community at night, in the evenings, holding your meetings, and leave it at a certain time that we know it's going to be there. Once a month at least in the community, so we can bring the students, so we can bring the workers. You don't want to do that. That's horrible. Next time I see you, I want to talk about the trial of Jesse Romero. I was there every day, and I have a lot to say about that. Thank you.
Yvonne Michelle Autry, followed by Jacqueline Richardson and Audrey George.
Yes, I have an issue with these new concentration camps because that's what they are. You're housing the homeless, which the city and the government has created, predominantly black people, some Hispanic people. Hispanic people, thank God, they're taking their people into their homes. Black people are still disenfranchised. The poor white people in the street are also subject to that stigmatism, whether it's mentally ill, subject to extermination, or that's a sacrifice for these devil worshippers that are PD. They need a sacrifice to move up in the pecking order. So what I'm saying is these are concentration camps. Why are safe homes or refuge for homeless being patrolled by the police? Right, because you need them there, not just because of the funding. They're being used for experiments, sex slaves. You get the DNA, the vampires, you people from those bloodlines. You drink their blood, you eat their flesh. You have a reservoir. It's a human harvest. These people, just like the Jewish people, prior to the legalized extermination, were quarantined in concentration camps. And they were labeled inferior, subhuman, substandard, and it was they were justifiably exterminated and tortured. The same thing is happening here, but it's covered up. I live to talk about it. This is on the record, and you are liable. There's a history that precedes me that does not exist. I'm not a pedophile, I'm not a witch, I'm not a sex-crazed sex goddess. I'm not a thief. I never abused my child. I'm not gay. But again, to justify your illegal entries, your contracting, special ops, secret ops, and your those that are, I think that they're FBI police, to attack us, we're TIs. Again, you have to have this SAR or the facial recognition to incriminate people that you do not like. I have information regarding the Homeland Security that surveils us, that hacks and eliminates and erases our emails and text messages. So again, you are pawns, but you have a responsibility, right, to discourage
Speaker Terry Akins.
Terry.
Jacqueline Richardson.
Next speaker, please.
And Audrey George.
Thank you.
Hi, I can see why I was targeted, and like I said, my ex-husband was working with all the politicians and Deborah Wasserman Schultz, and it was a joke to producers when I went to get a divorce and my sister wanted to kind of just move into that area. I did yell at NBC yesterday, however, that doesn't change my current situation with my roommates, Paul Marsick, and the other producer that I live with. From the Screen Actors Guild. It's the Olympic division now, and one of the, what do you call it? They were just here. The head of the sheriff's. Oh darn, I forgot his name. Sorry. They came to me, and they stopped the producers from attacking and creating havoc. It's Francisco Carrillo, that's who it is. And I have to say, I'm not very happy that LAPD totaled my car and then falsified reports with my roommate, and then my roommate was paid, as Paul was. They are goofing around. I haven't been targeted in a week, and they haven't bothered me, so obviously coming here is working to some degree. I am going to still have to get involved in politics because I have to save my ugly butt. But thank you for not bothering me, and please help me with the Olympic division. They don't need to be targeting me. I'm not doing anything, and the producers are just farting around.
Jacqueline Richardson.
This is a criticism against black people in the housing field and in the job market. But before I criticize black people, I'd like to say in some fields, in one field, the white people are doing the same thing. For instance, some white men are going around making babies with girls they don't really know. They get after black ones, white ones, Mexicans, and right now they're after Chinese give them babies, and they don't marry them and they don't support their babies. One of the reasons I believe that blacks are not getting better housing is because they're afraid that the black men are going in and make 5 babies and not support them and then leave, and they can't catch up with them. A reason right now I believe that blacks are not working in downtown Los Angeles is because in early 2000 and in 1999, that area, we were harassing Mexican men very badly, really messing with them and harassing them. And consequently, right now you look for black people working in downtown Los Angeles on the first floor, you'll find very, very few. And those few don't always keep their jobs. The black people that do work, they have good customer service skills. And I believe that the more we increase our public service skills, the more jobs we get. For instance, people with good public service skills invite the public to come in, they solve their problems for them, and those good customer service skills keep the customers coming back. They come back and the customers are paying the bills. The better the public service skills, the more customers come, the more bills get paid, and we get the cars and the houses and whatever else we need. Black people are the only ones that are having these problems. The white men have them too, but they hide their babies, they hide their seductions, but also they need help. So the women that are looking for people that have money, they can protect themselves from the women that are predators. But at the same time, the black men are also predators.
Audrey George.
Almost 100% of fatal officer-involved shootings have killed black and brown people. Christian Escobedo, 22 years old and sleeping when approached by cops, would not have been killed had he been white. I don't know if any of you can say that you really believe otherwise. He had not committed any crime when shot and killed. Christian was a victim of a system that is working absolutely as it was designed. A system that has respect for people, which I don't agree with, but reverence for laws, reverence for data. The communities such as that where Christian Escobedo lived are targeted in terms that show how the police think of those people as diseases to be removed. They use the word in police reports that we get from Public Records Act requests. They use the word containment, extraction, removal, laser precision, dosage, treatment. There is no respect for these people. That should be taken right off of the wall. And all of you should be ashamed for being part of this system, being complicit.
The next speakers, Zach Sherwin, Tabitha Jolivet, and Elizabeth Escobedo.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge a couple of moments that have happened during the meeting today. We're in the bowels of LAPD HQ, and you are the people sitting up at the dais. And so, the moment's been named a couple of times, but Commissioner Murphy Goldsmith, that moment where you said, I know you won't be satisfied with anything short of abolition, it obviously caught the attention of a number of the people who are here. And I don't know the spirit in which you intended it, but it did come off as flippant to those people, and I think you felt their rage, frankly. I think that, even more so, an even clearer case is when, during the altercation when people left, Commissioner Soboroff, you said to somebody on their way out, "Goodbye, happy holidays." That kind of, you have all the power in this situation. You are at the dais. These activists are taking time to come, and be here and participate in this process. Your colleagues on the panel don't use that kind of sarcastic, condescending tone to people on their way out. I understand that it's confrontational and that they're pushing back against you. I think, as the leader of this commission, that is the way that the public has access to communicate with people who are involved with LAPD, you have an obligation to not let that kind of thing happen, to keep your emotions in check. It's a small piece of this, and it's also a really important piece of it. I think that you should be grateful to smart, passionate people like Hamid and Tiff and Jamie, who got thrown out of the meeting, for coming and for doing their homework and for caring enough about this to dive deeply into these issues. I care about it, and I don't have the skills to do those kinds of things. They're farther along than I am. If they're wrong, then talk to them about it and explain to them why they are. And if they're right, then that entails certain implications and obligations as well. And so to be disrespectful to them on their way out of the room, I do think that's shameful. You know, the phrase "shame on you" gets used in here, and to me, this is the way people find out about this thing. This is the face of the commission, and that's what it is. And I think that's an embarrassment. It leads me to something that other people have said from this podium today, which is that it is wild that these meetings happen at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning and that they happened here. People aren't going to come. Not enough people are going to come anyway, even if you have them at times that people don't have work conflicting with it, but more people would come and would see what goes on and witness that kind of thing. I think they should, and I think they would want to. And finally, to have this be the setting for this meeting, you know, I can't imagine what it's like to be a grieving parent and to have to come here, to approach, to go through the security scanner, to come in, to be ringed by these armed officers. You know, the emotional fortitude that's required to do that kind of thing, I just can't imagine it. So come on.
Tabitha Jolivet, Elizabeth Escobedo, and Sol Marquez.
During this time of year in my family, I celebrate the birth of Jesus because I identify as a Christian. And I'm in a community where we celebrate many things this time of year. So I think the focus on holidays is appropriate, particularly when respectful. As I think about what my faith teaches me, I think about scriptures like this in the Gospel of Matthew, which was written by a Hebrew man. It says, "I was hungry and you gave me nothing. I was thirsty, you gave me no drink. I was a stranger and you did not welcome me. I was sick and I was in prison and you didn't visit me." Then they will also answer saying, "Lord, when did we see you thirsty or hungry or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison?" And I say, "When you did not do it to the least of these, you've done it to me." This is a paraphrase. When I think about naked people, I think actually about Albert Ramon Dorsey, who was naked in a gym in Hollywood, and he was murdered. I think about this particular scripture in light of Albert Ramon Dorsey's story. When I think about people who might have needs, like Christian, who was asleep. Sleep means that you can't do anything, right? You're completely disabled when you're sleeping. I think about Christian being asleep, and he was murdered in his sleep. I think, what condemnation must be in this room when we're complicit in silencing, for example, the voices of those who speak to power, and never aiming to turn that vigor and silence to demand that the police stop killing our people. I think about judgment. And I think that judgment happens here and now. That's why you're feeling the force of those of us in the community who are outraged by the multiple ways that you show disdain for us.
Next speaker, please. Thank you.
My name is Elizabeth Medrano Escobedo. My son Christian was killed by Detective Officer Arteaga from LAPD Back Division. In Holland Back Division, your officers, Mr. Moore, they harass the youth in our community constantly. But I have educated the youth in my community that they have legal rights If they're not on probation or parole, they don't have the right to be harassed constantly and stopped on their way home from school telling them they fit the description of someone they're looking for. I educated them and let them know that they need to ask for an incident card, because for all those stops, they have to have an incident card. And the majority of the time, they do not have those. I have seen Hollenbach officers label the youth in the community as gang members and given them names without the kids saying, this is who I am. They've given this boy a name of Fat Boy because he's heavy set and he was on his way walking from school. These are the stories that I've heard since my son has passed away. They call my community a high crime area. Well, my community came together. They sold food next door at my mother-in-law's house. The people of my community, high crime, low poverty area, came together and donated all that food, water, sodas. They put on a car wash in front of my house, and they collected over $20,000 from 10 a.m. to 6 o'clock in the afternoon to pay for my son's entire funeral. Because my son was a giver. I used to get upset with him because he didn't have money after he would get paid. But my son would give to his community. He would take kids to get haircuts that their parents couldn't afford. He would take kids to get something to eat because their parents couldn't afford to get them something to eat. My son wasn't a criminal. That's the first thing they asked me when I got to the scene. Is he a gang member? Does he have any tattoos? Who does he affiliate with? Does he have a criminal history? My son was none of that. My son was actually worked for the Los Angeles County Sheriff Department for 1.5 years, Mr. Moore. My son was not a criminal. My son walked from South El Monte to LA just to get home, to get to his bed. He wanted to rest because he needed to climb up a big hill. And he fell asleep. And within seconds, the JER officers arrived. They shoot and kill my son 4 times. They shot him 4 times. One of them being in the head, the back of the head, exiting his temple. His brain matter spilled out of his head. Okay? That's not the way you wake somebody up. What happened to de-escalation? If you guys got a phone call, like the news said, if you guys get a phone call of 2 men sleeping behind a vehicle, one of them possibly with a gun, what the news says, the fake news like Trump says, why did only one police car roll? Why wasn't there backup? Immediate backup. You have someone that you're going to approach that supposedly has a gun. Where was the backup? Where was the de-escalation? How did they approach him? That's what I'm here to find out today. I want to know what the officers are claiming, which is probably going to be justified shooting like all the cases that I've heard. I've met so many mothers, so many grieving mothers from January 14th when this happened to now. So many grieving mothers that I don't understand why they have to be suffering. And the president said, happy holidays. How can we have happy holidays? We're missing our child. We're missing our loved ones. I haven't even been able to tell his great-grandmother that he passed away. It's been a year. And she's elderly, and she's sick, and I haven't been able to tell her. So when she comes over for Christmas and asks for my son, I just tell her he's working. Because I don't have, I cannot tell her that he passed away because she's going to pass away when she finds out, because we all loved Christian. He was a giver, and the community, my high crime, low poverty neighborhood, gave so much for my child because he was a giver. He was a giver of life. He was kind. He was generous. And your officers, Officer Arteaga, took my loved one away from me, took him and broke a bond that should have never been broken. Should have never been broken. You know, I'm sure all of you guys have not lost a child due to an officer-involved shooting or anything like that. I shouldn't have got to go through this. I should not have to be sitting here waiting for an answer from people that don't even know what happened, that weren't even there. They're just going on hearsay of what their officers are stating. I'm sure the city does not want to get sued. The police department doesn't want to get sued. Officer Arteaga doesn't want to get sued. Because you guys have to, I don't understand either why LAPD investigates their own. It should be a different agency investigating LAPD, just like sheriffs should have a different agency investigating them. Because all of you people up here, from what I've heard, it's just, I already know what to expect. What I've been hearing day after day, time after time, it was a justified shooting. But you know what? I'll see you in court, Mr. Moore.
Sorry for your loss.
The last speakers. The next speaker, Sol Marquez.
Is who?
Sol Marquez.
Thank you. Say his name. Say his name. And it's very difficult to have to go after Christian Escobedo's mother. And sorry. I'm here because, you know, you talk today about wanting to de-escalate and treat the homeless with respect, right? And we find out that Christian was sleeping when the cops went up to him. And that's kind of similar of what happens to the homeless, right? They're sleeping and they're approached by these officers, and then Christian is shot. So it went from him being asleep to his friend running away to then Christian being shot. Those are the facts. That's what we know. And now we're going, like Christian's mother said, Elizabeth said, that we're going based on what the officer said. And that's what we're going to justify his killing on what he said. What about Christian? What's his word on this? He will never be able to defend himself. So we're only going based on what the officer says and the reason for him killing him. Elizabeth and I, we sat with Jesse Romero's family for a whole week during his trial. He was 14 years old, killed in Boyle Heights in the same year that Carlos Montes had said 8 people killed in 2016. I live only a building or two away from where Jesse was killed. And so it's terrible to have to sit here. And I came with his family, and I've come here before, listening to you all justify that these killings are completely justified and they were within policy. That is completely unacceptable. We will not be okay with that ever, and we will continue being here to remind you all that we need justice, and we will not ever get tired of demanding justice for Christian Escobedo, for Jesse Romero, and all Chicanos who have been killed by LAPD and East LA sheriffs.
We have no other comment cards on item number 4. We're on item number 5, closed session. We have 8 cards on 5A1 and 1 card on 5A2. The first 3 on 5A1 are Gina Viola, Michael Novick, and Carlos Montes. Michael Novick.
Yeah, you very, I'm not sure what else to say after what the mother had to say, what the family has to say, but I think that I want to raise some more general comments. I think that, this is not the involved party, C. Escobedo. This is the murder victim, C. Escobedo. This is the fatality, C. Escobedo. I think that when you list these officer-involved shootings, you should detail who was killed in the incident if someone was killed. I'm curious, it says at the top of the header, officer-involved shooting and head strike, HS, and then none of the 4 cases that you list show a head strike. You have 4 cases listed here. That's 4 people shot by the LAPD within 12 days in January. So, you can claim that the shootings and killings are down, but somehow you managed to shoot 4 different people between January 14th of 18 and January 26th, and 2 of them clearly Christian Escobedo and Jay Calderon, Hispanic. I don't know about Glover, but I suspect there might be somebody who's black. The 3rd one, you have nobody listed at all. You have a date of occurrence and you don't say who was shot. So I don't understand how you keep these records. I also want to point out that you have, just this week alone, you have 2 police officers involved with killing Christian Escobedo. You have 5 involved with Calderon. You have 1 more with the nameless person in incident 3. And you have 1 sergeant and 2 more officers. So that's 10 officers and a sergeant just this week. You have the responsibility to look at the pattern and practice of these killings. You heard Michael Moore say earlier today that there are only about 1,700 uses of force out of hundreds of thousands of stops. But what that says is these killings are the tip of the iceberg of intrusive, abusive policing.
Carlos Montes. Gina Viola. Audrey George.
So I've asked more than once about the officer-involved shooting and that terminology. I think it's very misleading to the public to call it an officer-involved shooting. You need to call it what it is, which is officer shoot civilian, officer kill civilian. I think that as people start to educate themselves more about what's happening here, you'll see more and more of us showing up to these meetings to demand answers. And officer-involved shooting is very misleading. Very misleading. People who read that in the public think an officer has been shot. That's what they think's gone on here. And I know that's on purpose. So I will make my request again. I'm so sorry for you, Liz. It's hard to be up here and speak to this with you here, so I just wanted to say that. And also echo what other people have said. It is all black and brown people that your officers are killing. And it's all predictive policing. And I will say what Stop LAPD Spying has done is incredible because they are drilling down the data. And some of what we saw this past weekend is we're going to start to be able to identify that these are premeditated killings by the police. They're being sent out for these people to be killed. And the data is starting to show that. We're starting to be able to connect those dots given these documents that Stop LAPD Spying has spent countless number of hours going through and researching. So it's important. 12 days, 4 officer-involved shootings last January. So you've got a big job to do today in closed session, and I hope you do it. Thank you.
Audrey George. Sol Marquez. Adam Smith. Elizabeth Escobedo.
Okay, I think I can speak a little bit better. So the item number is A1, and we will be discussing, or you all will be discussing, whether to discipline, dismiss, or release public employee performance evaluation. Right? Is that correct? On these related cases, right? Well, I've sat here before, and I don't think I've ever seen you all rule against the whatever incident the police did during these shootings. I really hope that you all completely break that trend and that you all side with the fact that Christian Escobedo should have never been killed, that whole escalation and never taking the steps to de-escalate should have been what happened. We won't rest until we see justice, like we've been saying, and unfortunately you all keep killing people and then saying that it's completely within policy, which is unacceptable. So you will be seeing us over and over and over, and I know I've seen a lot of LAPD spying, a lot of White People for Black Lives Matter, a lot of Black Lives Matter here, and we're only going to keep bringing people in. I do want to say to everybody who's attended and supported Christian Escobedo's mother, Elizabeth Medrano, that there is an event happening on January 12th, and we hope that you all can make it out. We will be having the community again of Happy Valley, who united around Elizabeth Medrano and Christian Escobedo's family during this horrible tragedy, and united to show that despite what the LAPD has stamped this neighborhood with, like they have done with Bolt Heights, and calls it a gang-ridden, infested place, we are united, and we have united over and over again against these crimes that are committed against our people. Justice for Christian Escobedo, justice for all of us.
Adam Smith, followed by Elizabeth Escobedo and Tabitha Jolivet.
Liz, I'm sorry that I know you, because these are the circumstances that I know you. I'm happy to know you now. I'm happy to have spent time with you, but I'm so sorry that Christian had to be murdered for us to meet. There's been a lot of talk in here today about, the shame of this police commission, and I think the most shameful part of it is that Christian's mother came in here and spoke to the fact that she already knows that what this board is going to do. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and it's incredibly shameful that a mother can come in here and realize that 99% of the time this board will say, like you've done so many times, that her son deserved to be executed by the LAPD. Because there's no, you can put different terms on it, like justified, officer feared for his life, but at the end of today, you're going to go home and see your families, and you're going to, what you will have done when you say that the shooting was in policy is say that Christian Escobedo deserved to be executed by the LAPD. And so I guess Mr. Bonner and Ms. Decker, you haven't had as much experience in saying that folks have been deserved to be executed by the LAPD. Everyone else up here is pretty seasoned at it. So I implore you to, actually think just think about, look at Liz and think about Christian Escobedo. Think about that temple where the bullet came out and his brain spilled all over the place.
Like I said previously, my son came walking. He came to rest. He was tired. He came walking from South El Monte. He went through South El Monte, various different cities, Alhambra, San Gabriel, different cities. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't committing a crime. My son came. He was trying to get home, trying to get to his bed. He even told his friend that the floor felt like he was in bed already because he was so tired, so exhausted from the long walk. My son didn't deserve to die. He wasn't committing a crime. No officers were threatened. No community was threatened. This happened at 6:30 in the morning. The street where he died, it's a very narrow street. There's nobody passing by at that time. No one. I usually wake up. If I don't find him in bed, he's usually home. But there's days when he likes to go out. If I don't find him in bed, I call him. He always answers me. That day I was 4 minutes late. He died at 6:30. I called him at 6:34. What I would give to have woken up a little sooner, maybe I could have picked him up and I wouldn't have to be standing here in front of you. My son was just tired. He saw the hill that he had to climb. He told his friend, let me rest for a little bit. And it took them seconds, your officers, seconds, to shoot and kill. What happened to the de-escalation? What happened to getting proper backup? What happened to, how do you approach a person that's asleep and engage in gunfire automatically within seconds? There was a witness out there that saw and heard what happened. No, he shouldn't have died. That's all I'm saying. He was tired. He didn't get stopped by any other PD. And I know the rules. I know that you have to say, I was in fear for the safety of myself and my partner and that of the community. I know, because I too work law enforcement. And I know that's what's taught in the academy. So, with them saying they're in fear for their safety, I don't believe that. I don't believe that one bit. How could they be in fear of a person that was asleep, laying down, in deep sleep because he was so tired from walking? How can they say they were in fear for their safety? And did they use proper protocol in approaching a sleeping suspect? I don't know, but that's what I'm here to find out. Proper procedures. You guys had a de-escalation policy back in July of 2017. What happened to de-escalation? Where was de-escalation in my son's case? Why didn't they try to de-escalate the situation? Seconds. It took seconds for them to shoot him. I don't know what your report's going to say or what the police officer's report's going to say, but it took seconds. is what I'm being told. For them to make that split-second decision, which I'm tired of hearing because I've heard it through all of Jesse's case, slicing the pie, split-second decisions. I get it. They need to go home, though. Officers need to get home to their families also, but so did my son. He needed to come home to his family. And within seconds, getting murdered, because that's what I call it. I don't call it an officer-involved shooting. I call it that he was murdered by Officer Arteaga. And like I said before, my son was a giver. And that high crime area that your officers say, there's a lot of good people, a lot of educated people that live there, that graduated from school, went off to college, have degrees. There's a lot of people like that too. It's not just poverty, like Hollenbach officers think it is. But I'm glad that I'm educating the community. I'm educating the youth so they won't be a victim to your officers. I'm glad that I'm educating them to bring a sergeant at the scene when your officers are going overboard and overreacting, should I say, because that's what they do. They overreact a lot. And I wish that I can talk to Captain Labrada about it, because he doesn't know what they're doing out there. But since I've educated the kids, guess what? Hollenbach has seized. Or maybe we're on one of those target things that the community over here is talking about. Maybe we're on the radar. I don't know. That's why I haven't seen a lot of police presence anymore. Thank you for your time.
Ms. Escobedo, I just want to say I'm so sorry for your loss, and I want you to know that I know that no words I say can comfort you, but I hear you, we hear you, and we take very seriously our job to evaluate the evidence objectively and thoroughly and come to as fair a decision as possible.
Tabitha Jolivet. And please let the record reflect that there is a typo on the agenda. Item number 5A2 should read Head Strike HS rather than OIS, and item number 3 should read OIS animal. Thank you.
Liz, thank you for being so brave. I don't know how you find the words to share your heart, and you do it with such great dignity. That's the same dignity that your son deserved. So I'm glad that you voiced an apology. That's the first I've heard in the 2 hours that we've been here. Someone say, "I'm sorry that your son's life was stolen." Thank you for apologizing. And I know that you've indicated that you're not sure if there are any words that you can offer to help. I think one thing that you can do is do right by Christian. And when rendering a decision, not devolve into the same social script that gets devolved into each time we have what you deem an officer-involved shooting. We call it murder. When there's a murder, it's right to do right by the family and enact justice. And justice can be enacted by discerning what is true, not simply through objectifying facts, right, which is a kind of positivism, but instead by appraising and assessing what is real, what is true, from multiple perspectives. And that process needs to be a process that does not only involve the police, who are simply here to preserve the way things are. So that's something that I think you can do that would make a big difference. It certainly won't bring Christian's life back, but I think it will show that this body of people is actually for the community and not simply to preserve the police. I also think that you can stop the process of releasing video footage as propaganda. We've seen the video footage from the body cams of the officers who murdered Mr. Dorsey while he was naked in the gym. And the narratives around what we're seeing is what is so problematic, that reinforces this very system that we feel so concerned about because we see injustice over and over again.
Next speaker, please.
We have 2 speakers on item number 5A2. We have Michael Novick, and then we have Yvonne Michelle Autry on item number 2, 3, and 4.
Autry's on all of them?
Yes.
Yes, I'm glad the record was corrected here about that. The head strike apparently involved somebody being thrown to the ground and hitting their head, and the other number 3 was apparently a dog that was shot, not a person. But I want to reiterate what was just said about the body cam footage releases. When they released the video of the killing of Mr. Dorsey,
That's not what this item is, so why don't you stick to the agenda?
I'm sticking to the agenda. They simultaneously, I'm wondering if there's any video about these cases, because when they released the video of Mr. Dorsey, they also released security camera footage from a day before, claiming it showed him in a scuffle with the security guard. So I think that these releases are propagandistic in nature. But if you have footage from any of these shootings, killings, or head strikes, I'm wondering when they'll be released under your policy. I just want to say that, some of you who've been on the board longer know that I buried a child. My oldest stepson was killed in a motorcycle accident. And I come to these meetings, and I come to the vigils outside Jackie Lacey's office, and it's re-traumatizing week after week. And I come because I can't believe what it must be like for the parents who have lost children to law enforcement. So I don't wish it on any of you, but I think that apologies are not enough. You need to understand what it is like to walk in their shoes and think about that when you make these decisions. And you should find the killings and the head strikes out of policy, and you should create new policies. If you find that they're not out of policy, then you better create some policies that make them out of policy.
Yvonne Michelle Autry.
I'd also always like to support what Michael Novick said. Again, ostensibly it looks like, you're ethnically cleansing. I hear cleaning up and establishing a beautiful, blessed, if you will, good, all-white world. However, I know that there are some poor white people, not only that are in solidarity with us, but also suffering as well. Because again, they do not submit to this one world government, new world order, stratification of power. But the good black people, Hispanic people that are not in gangs, right? Those of us that are trying to work, those of us that give, I give as well. We are problems to that image of white supremacy because we threaten that image of entitlement and superiority.
Mr. President, the speaker is not speaking to
Well,
the
no,
item.
I'm speaking
move to item
relative.
number 2 now?
Okay, I'm speaking relative to the reason that the use of excessive force, blows to the head, continued extermination, subjugation, torture.
Which one are you on now?
So this is 2, isn't this 2?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right.
You're on 2 now?
Right, because, okay, the blows to the head, the shooting, this is still ongoing extermination of innocent people. So this is all going to prove that you are liable for the extermination of innocent people. We're humans, and I'm from Inglewood. I know that we still have an issue of criminal, misbehavior, which is usually due to capitalism. Okay, and
Go on to number 3 now?
well, yeah. So I get the time
You
for.
have to stay on topic.
Am I speaking to all 3 right now?
You're just not on topic.
Am I okay? But I'm addressing 2, 3, or 4. Am I coming back, or is it
Well,
cumulative?
well, why don't we start on 3 because you're off topic.
So it's cumulative.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Let's start the clock on item number 3, OIS
Okay, so-
00618.
Okay,
And
so
let's
that
try and
would
stay on topic.
Okay, so that would have been in a non-human related. Now, this is very interesting because in the murders of black women, in your police reports, it is stated that there was no human involved. So we were actually relegated to that level of animal, ugly, dirty, nasty, something put in the trash, worthy, not worthy to live, but of extermination, actually cleansing the community. I've also heard testimonies. Well, I know that Mexican mafia, and they feel that they have told me, because I understand Spanish, that they're under
President,
orders.
she is not speaking to the item, which is an
Well, no, this is the reason.
Go on to number 4.
Okay, no, the reason, again, that these uses of excessive force, abuse of authority, profiling, police brutality, this is the reason this is occurring, regardless of your bureaucracy and your nomenclature.
Let's reset the clock and we'll go to item number 5A4.
So again, we just want this documented because
Did you reset?
extermination.
I believe there's only 4 items.
Okay.
No, that's all. Again, you are liable for killing innocent people. Not only are your cadets and your police officers they're ordered and they're paid to exterminate certain people that threaten your white
President,
supremacy.
she's off topic
Off
again.
topic, that's last warning, we're on number 4.
This is relevant to the use of excessive force, whether it's a blow to the head, whether it's 4 shots to the head, to the back. This is an extermination. So you're liable for that. You're not, I have criminals that stalk me, okay, that are low-level mafia and other gangs, and your police officers do nothing because you're working in collusion.
Thank you. Let's go to
No,
closed
but
session.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss item number 5A1, 2, 3, and 4 in accordance to Government Code 54957. The Board of Police Commissioners has concluded its work in closed session. We are back in open session. The Executive Director will report out.
As to case 5A1 OIS 004-18, the decision on tactics is administrative disapproval to police officers, unanimous. Drawing and exhibiting in policy, 2 police officers, unanimous. Use of force in policy, 1 police officer, 2, unanimous. As to case 5A2, head strike, the chief's recommendations were adopted. As to case 5A3, OIS animal, the chief's recommendations were adopted. As to OIS 5A4, the chief's recommendations were adopted, and that concludes the report. Let the record reflect on case 5A1, 4 commissioners were present. On 5A2, 3, and 4, 3 commissioners were present.
Very good. Is there a motion to adjourn? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good. The Board of Police Commissioners now stands in adjournment. Thank you very much.
My name is Eric.
My name is May.
We are in Chinatown.
You're watching LA City View, Channel 35, our city, our channel.
Happy holidays and welcome to another episode of Adopt a Pet Today. Today is a special episode. It's our holiday